All right, as it is.
Greg Schneider.
Thank you very much.
Aye.
Aye, and opposed? Deletions, comments? All right, hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, that passes unanimously. And up to item 1E, and is the appointment of the vice chair. This committee members that we have present here today, myself and Mr. Nichols. Mr. Nichols, would you be interested in serving as the vice chair of the Business Operations and Finance Committee?
Yes, sir, I'd be happy to.
Thank you, sir. You have been so appointed. Thank you for your service. I'm going to miss the next 47 meetings. We'll move on to item 2A, the March 24 monthly financials. And if Mr. Cheney wants to jump in and share his wisdom, we'll go from there.
Thank you and good evening. So we'll lead off today with our March 24 monthly financials. The financial activity report was uploaded into the board docs provided for the board members and the public. And we'll walk through some of the content of that. Paging down is the monthly summary report that'll detail out the revenues and expenses by fund for the month. And you can see over the course of the month of March, revenues in Fund 10, our general fund, 19.7 million with expenses of 7.3. It says a net change. I've actually renamed that column, but it was after the publication of this. That's going to say variance going forward, because that's really what it is more of a variance than a net change. But needless to say, in our general operating fund, we had 12.4 million more in revenues in the month of March than we did expenses. March is one of the months that typically has revenues exceeding expenses overall, though that doesn't quite necessarily hold true as we look down the page and see the totals at the very bottom. $21 million in revenues, $24.1 million in expenses. Our expense column is inflated substantially by the Fund 39 referendum approved debt service fund, where we made additional principal payments to the tune of over $13 million to prepay that Fund 39 debt related to the construction of Fruzen Intermediate School and then some improvements at our other schools as well. So if that prepayment had not been in there, then revenues would exceed expenditures, much like would be typical for the month of March for school districts. Any questions on the monthly summary before I advance forward and talk about a couple of other things in the report?
I don't see any.
Okay, hearing none. This actually shows up on the next page, the top of page 2, I believe. Might be 3, come to think of it. But so every month we take a look at, we do the monthly summary report to show revenues and expenses by month. But more importantly, the second half of this paragraph here at the top talks about fiscal year-to-date expenses, $74.4 million, outpacing our fiscal year-to-date revenues, $64.8 million, by $9.6 million. And I think it's just really important that we point out that is very typical in school operations, that expenditures outpace revenues. We receive a large number of revenues that get booked in the month of June. So June will be another month where we would anticipate revenues to exceed expenses and kind of balance everything out. But more importantly is that statement really goes to reflect upon the importance of maintaining an appropriate fund balance so that we can draw on those funds to meet our day-to-day obligations in months where expenses exceed revenues. So just kind of pointing that out. Many people look at fund balance and think that that's there, what is that there for? Well, it's there in part to make sure that we have the financial means to be able to provide operations on a day-to-day basis. And you'll see that again here in just a little bit also. So that said, I want to jump down to the last couple of pages. We'll come back and talk about the revenues and expenses when we actually look at the financial numbers momentarily. But if we look at our cash and investment report, the board has seen this before. Whoops, and I lost it on my page. Let's try this again. So this shows our asset position as of the end of March, and it talks about the various financial accounts that we have listed in the first column, the financial institution that those accounts are invested in, the interest rate, and then in our current year columns, we see the end of the current month, which in this case is the end of March of 2024, and the end of the prior month, so we can see where we were at the end of February of 2024 as well. And then to the right of that, in that final column, is a previous year, so that's the 22-23 school year, the end of March, so that we have that for comparison purposes as well. You know, you can look at that from the perspective of what's going on in the general fund. You know, why did we have a $5 million assets on deposit in the general fund at the end of March in 23 as compared to $2.5 million here in February and March of 24? And that's because we simply made changes with our sweep account at First Mid-Bank and Trust in an effort to have more of our assets being swept and invested in that account and greater protections in that account than in the general fund account. I'd like to call to your attention the bottom couple of rows because I believe this is new to the board. Again, trying to continually to provide enhancements to this. So there's a row there that reads total general fund operating budget assets. And essentially that's our current cash liquidity, the amount of funds that's available to support general fund operations. And that is essentially the addition of the general fund checking account and the ICS shadow account, those first two rows. And then what I do is I calculate it out based upon our operating fund budget into how many days of liquidity do we have to operate the school district in the absence of any additional assets, cash coming into the district. How many more days can we operate before we essentially run out of money? And you can see here at the end of March of 24, it is 71 days. And in comparison, at the end of February of 24, it was 66 days. So our liquidity actually bought us an extra week of operations here within the past month. That number will change, you know, month to month. We'll see that number go up substantially, or I don't want to say substantially. We'll see that number go up, but we'll also see that number slide down. But more importantly, it's just a good benchmark for us to look at to say, okay, if operations had to continue, but for whatever reason, we didn't get any more money coming into the school districts. Our grant reimbursements from the DPI were being delayed, property taxes, timing, whatever. How many days could we operate as we do today? So that number is 71. Any questions on the cash and investment report or that statement before we move on?
Just remind me what our availability on our line of credit is.
Our line of credit is $7 million. We have access to our current line of credit through June 30th of 2024. The line, from the bank's perspective, essentially stays open through October 30th. However, state statutes prevent us from being able to draw upon that line after June 30th. So again, here we are in May. We've taken a look at our cash liquidity standpoint. Do we think we're going to need to borrow in the month of June? As of today, I think we're going to be fine. We'll take a look at that again the beginning point of June to be a little bit more thorough probably in the review as well to make sure that not only are we good through the month of June, because typically school districts hit a low point mid-June, but then we also have to look at it from the perspective of, are we going to have sufficient cash on hand for July, August, September, and then in mid-September, we'll receive our first equalization aid payment for the 24-25 school year. So again, we have to look at it from a short-term perspective and somewhat a longer-term perspective as well.
Perfect, thank you.
Yep, thanks for that question. Any other questions? Okay. And then the next section in the financial activity report that we want to just review again is the monthly purchasing commitments. And again, school board policy directs that the administration will make the Business Operations and Finance Committee or the Teaching, Learning, and Equity People Services Committee aware of purchases made in the dollar amounts of $50,000 to $100,000. And on the next page, there are 3 such activities that took place in the month of March. One of them, nearly $58,000 for the purchase of 150 Chromebooks through IT Savvy that utilizes Common School Fund resources. Essentially, those are resources that are designated for library purposes. The assets have to be purchased, retained in the library, and can be checked out of the library, very similar to a library book. But those Chromebooks should not be utilized elsewhere, kind of on a day-to-day operational basis. Number 2, purchase of $88,600 and change science supplies, curricular resources from Vernier Software and Technology. That is being made out of the ESSER 3 grant. And then the last item on here was a renovation project at Cunningham in the first floor of the C wing, and essentially the C wing is the older portion of the building. We did a restroom renovation for the females there to support that, and then our Even Start programming to the tune of just over $95,000 there as well. That will be funded through our Community Service Fund, Fund 80, as the activity will be used more by the community in that programming at Even Start. I know some people may question the need for the restroom renovations at Cunningham. I can't explain this to you. I can only tell you what happened is that in the past, the male restrooms on both the first and second floor had been renovated over the course of a couple of summers. For whatever reason, the female restrooms on the first and second floor were not included in that project. First and second floor male restrooms were done at different times, not all together at once. So there was just some disparity, that prioritization was done to the male restrooms, not to the female restrooms. So we addressed the female restrooms on the first floor. That way, it's a similar experience, so to speak, for the ladies and the female students that are there as well. So with that, I'll pause again and ask if there's any questions that I or others can answer with regards to that. And if not, we'll get into the actual monthly financials. All righty, let me share this. All right, so we'll make this as big as we can. So we're going to start by looking at our revenues like we do every month, looking at the month of March here of 2024, our Fund 10 revenues. So you'll see there are some highlights here that are in yellow and some highlights in green. For the most part, I'll speak to the green highlights because those are the ones that are most significant. The yellow highlights were things that I went back through and I thought to myself, boy, as a board member, I'd probably want to know a little bit of details maybe about what's going on with those accounts. So I highlighted those in yellow, and those are also addressed in the financial activity report. But just in the interest of time tonight, we'll kind of focus on the green highlights unless any board members have specific questions with regards to the yellow or even unhighlighted items too, for that matter. So looking at Fund 10, our revenues, if we scroll down to the top of page 2, you'll see our General Fund 10 revenues for the month of March, $19.7 million. As compared to $22.3 million for the same reporting month, March of 2023. So a little bit less than that, but more importantly, if we look at fiscal year to date, we're at $56.8 million in the current year versus $56.9, almost $57 million through the end of March in 2023. A bit of difference there, about $170,000 difference, but on the grand scheme, that's not overly significant. Very close, very tight, and looking pretty good from my perspective. If we scroll back up then and look at some of the significant revenues that came in the month of March, you'll see in the middle of page 1 our equalization aid in source 621 reflects a payment or a receipt of $15,257,000 and change. And again, if you scroll over or look over three columns to the right, that same payment last year in the 22-23 school year was just over $17 million. So a difference of about $1.8 million. That's simply keep in mind that the state reduced our equalization aid for this year's budget. So no real pause for concern there. The other thing I'd point out is if you look in the fiscal year to date percentage, you'll see that that's 65% this year, and then it was actually 65% last year. And that's, while the state distributes their equalization aid over the course of 4 payments over the course of a year, it's not 25% each payment. The first payment is 15%, I believe. And then the second payment boosts everything up to 40%. It's not a 40% of your equalization aid, but it's that 25% difference from payment 1 to payment 2 to end result at 40%. And then at the third payment that occurs in March, they get you to 65% of your scheduled aid. So that's why you see that 65%. And then, I guess, taking it one step further, the fourth installment or equalization aid payment will come in mid-June. And then the other thing to point out is that our per pupil aid, source 695, revenues in the month of March, we received $4,368,154 in our state per pupil aid, as compared to almost $4.5 million last year. And again, 100.01% of budget this year, 100% of budget last year. Any questions on Fund 10 revenues? All righty, let's scroll down a little bit and we'll talk about Fund 27 found on page 2. So here, special education receipts $666,153 compared to $712,000 last year. So a little bit trail. Year to date this year, 3.6 million. Last year, just shy of 4 million. So about a $380,000 separation there. Not overly significant. Looking at percentage of budget in Fund 27 for revenues, we're at 22.7%. Last year, we were at 24.3, almost 24.4%. As is typical in special education, the lion's share of your revenues on a monthly basis come in 2 different sources or revenue streams. One is the special education state aid up at source 611, and you can see $630,933 of our $666,000 came in that one line item alone. And then the other revenue line, I didn't even highlight it, but I'll comment on it real quick, is source 780, the federal revenue through state other than. Essentially, that's the district's Medicare reimbursements that we receive for providing such services to eligible pupils, where we receive just over $35,000 in revenues there. Any questions on 27 revenues? All right, continuing on, and again, we'll just kind of focus on the green highlights. So that'll take us down to Fund 50 on page 3. And here we see our food service fund generated just over $500,000, $885 in revenues in the month of March of 24. Comparing that back to March of 23, where they generated $417,000 in revenues. So we're a bit stronger there this month. And again, if you look at fiscal year to date, 2.79, $2,790,000 in revenues here in fiscal year 24, compared to fiscal year 23, $2,782,000. You know, so a variance there of about $8,500, and again, fairly tight. As is typical, once again, the lion's share of revenues for Fund 50 come in our federal food service aid, Source 717, and that's based on the number of meals, both breakfast and or lunch, that are served to students in the month, and then based on a reimbursement rate from the federal government. Any questions there? All right, just a real quick recap on the revenues on page 4. It shares our grand total of revenues, $21,007,000, almost $21,008,000 here in the current year. And again, 23.5, almost 23.6 million last year. And then fiscal year to date comparisons as well, 64.8 currently, 75.3 last year. There's not really much in the revenues upon my review that were overly concerning. So if any board members have questions on the revenues, anything that we talked about or didn't talk about, before we move on to expenses, we'll take those now. All right, let's jump over to the expense report. Let me get this bigger for the people at home to see. All right, so the expense report's 11 pages long. There's lots of data in here, and again, we'll try to talk about big picture at the green highlighted items, but certainly we'll be willing to address questions that boards may have about specific line items to the best of our ability as well. Let's jump to page 4 to begin with and look at expenses overall in Fund 10, because I think it's best to start big picture. And you can see in the month of March here in the current school year, we had $7.3 million worth of expenses as compared to March of last year, just nearly $8 million worth of expenses. So, you know, probably about a $650,000 or so variance between the two. Looking at fiscal year to date this year, $45.8 million. Fiscal year to date last year was over $51 million in expenses. So our expenses currently are certainly favorable to the district. And then if we scroll back to the top and we look at our salaries and benefits, because that's, you know, we lead with salaries. That's where the lion's share of our expenses are. So on page 1 in our salaries, you'll see expenses in the month of March just under 4.1 million. It was 4.5 million last year. And if you think about, boy, that $4 million seems a little high for expenses. We did have 3 payroll runs in the month of March. So that would contribute to those numbers being higher than perhaps the board's used to seeing on any other monthly basis. Fiscal year to date, salaries, almost $23 million here in the current year, just over $25 million a year ago, March of 23. So again, you know, we're running $3+ million favorable there. Don't interpret that as $3 million of savings, $3 million of potential surplus. It was budgeted for less, so it's gonna be less. If we continue on and look at expenses, or I'm sorry, the benefits, employee benefits on page 2, in the current month, in the March of 24, $1.8 million in employee benefit costs, as compared to almost $1.9 million for the same reporting month a year ago. So a variance of about $85,000, $90,000 there. More importantly, perhaps looking at fiscal year to date, $10.3 million this year, $11.7 million last year. So again, trending favorably. And just a reminder that a lot of the expense reductions on the employee benefit side were the result of a couple of changes. One, the reduction in our health savings account benefit to the employees, and other design changes with our health plan for this current year as well. Scrolling down to the bottom of page 2, we talk about our purchase services. Purchase services are such things as cleaning services, utilities, people transportation costs, contracted technology support, etc. Yeah, I said cleaning services, okay. So in the month of March, we had purchase service expenses of 1.2 million compared to the same point in time last year, about $40,000 more. Fiscal year to date this year, 9.9 million, just under that. Last year it was just over 10.4 million, so about a $500,000 variance there, all favorable for us as well. So the budget, certain line items appear to be performing as anticipated and expected. I think that's all the commentary I had with respect to Fund 10 expenses, but I'll pause and ask if there's specific questions.
I have a question on, in Fund 10 on line, or 360, technology and software services. We're at 109.84% of our budget year to date. So could you explain that, please?
Sure. So that's a good example where obviously purchasing that was charged to that line item exceeded the amount that was originally allocated for that line item. So what we need to do is the business office needs to work with our respective counterparts, budget managers elsewhere to determine where that overage existed, what caused it, and then more importantly, how are we going to correct it? So there will need to be a reallocation from elsewhere within the budget to bring additional resources into that line item at about $110,000 or so to bring that back within budget. Now, there's two different ways that we can do reallocations. The state permits us to do what's called a budget transfer, where we can move money from certain line items to this line item so long as it doesn't amend or change the budget as originally presented and adopted. And it kind of gets down into the details, you know. The other one is a budget revision where we look at, you know, a department budget and we say, okay, we need $110,000. Where can we find that? We can't. You know, we can find $85,000 within the budget, but then we need to borrow the remaining resources from other budgetary line items. That then is a budget revision, and that would need to come back before the board for approval. So we hope to be working through that here in May, probably in June as well. I would suspect that in June at our committee meeting and likely in July at our committee meeting, we'll have budget revisions to review with the board for approval. But yeah, essentially, if you're looking at that fiscal year to date current column percentage and where you see that we're over the 100% mark, that essentially says that we've spent more than what was originally allocated there. Sometimes it's rather menial in the amount. You know, looking at that same page, if we go up to 328 building rental, that likely is attributed to the rental payments we make to Hendricks Commercial Properties for the rental of the Eclipse Center Auto Bay to support our Beloit Memorial Autos program. We budgeted $20,500. Our current expenses there are $21,080, so we're 2.83% over budget. But at the same token, we've got April, May, and June payments, you know, that need to be made there. So, yeah, hopefully that answers that question sufficiently for you.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any others questions on Fund 10 before we advance on? All right. We'll jump to Fund 27, down on page 4. And actually, we'll jump to the very end of Fund 27 on page 5. Here you see monthly expenses, 1.9 million compared to monthly expenses for the same reporting month last year, just under 1.9 million, a variance there of roughly around $80,000. Fiscal year to date, 10.1 million this year. Fiscal year to date last year, 10.1 million, a separation of about $30,000. And again, you've heard me say it before, and you'll hear me say it often going forward. In lots of cases, when we look at month to month and year to year, they're just so tightly aligned. Quite honestly, it makes producing the financial activity report in future years, after I get a year's worth of activity in, pretty easy, because then it's pretty much just going in and updating the values, because you're typically talking about the same activity month to month, because that just all happens. And again, in Fund 27, salaries drive that for the most part. We'll see salary expenses for the month of March, just over $1,080,000, compared to the same reporting month last year, just under 1.1 million, $20,000 or so separation there. And again, looking at fiscal year to date, 5.6, 5,614,000 here this year. Fiscal year to date last year, $5,648,000, almost $649,000, you know, a $30,000 separation. All going good. Benefit-wise, $527,000 this year, $526,000 in employee benefit costs to support our staff that work in our special education department. Fiscal year to date, 2.8 million. Fiscal year to date last year, just over 3 million. And then the last large item is purchase services in special ed, where we've got $337,000 in spending this year as compared to $250,000 last year. Fiscal year to date, it's a little bit stronger here, almost 1.7 million as compared to 1.4 million last year. So percent of expenses is exceeding last year. It's 81% this year, 77.6% last year. But that could all very well just be a matter of timing of when payments are made. So nothing I don't see currently to be overly concerned about. Any questions on Fund 27? We'll talk Fund 38 and Fund 39 real quick. These are two funds that we don't speak about often because there's really only expenditure activities that happen in these funds twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall. And that's when the district makes our debt and principal payments on our debt. So Fund 38, this fund is called our non-referendum debt service fund. And it's termed that way intentionally because these are funds that were borrowed by the school board and the district through a process that did not require a referendum, a public vote, so to speak. So the debts were acquired and we're making those principal payments. So we have principal payments here in Fund 38, that row at the very top, 675, that shows principal payment of $90,000 in the month of March. And then immediately below it is the interest payments on those outstanding bonds, which was just under $94,300. So a total expenditure there of $184,300. And again, if we look to the right, a few columns, you'll see last year in the month of March, $90,000 in principal. Our interest expenses were a bit higher, $98,500 in interest. Why the reduction in interest from last year to this year is because we've had a couple of principal payments, so you don't have as much principal outstanding that you're paying interest on. And then you can look at fiscal year to date, $766,000 this year as compared to $749,000 last year. Interest payment comparison as well. And again, you know, pretty much on par with budget. Our principal payment expense was a little bit over budget. And I'd have to look into, you know, the why that was. But honestly, the 2.27% over budget there isn't overly concerning to me. Any questions on Fund 38, non-referendum debt? At some point in the future, I would like to educate the full board a bit more on what our outstanding debt obligations are. So that's on the to-do, and we'll get that back before the committee at an appropriate time here over the next few months. When we look at page 7, this speaks to our referendum-approved debt. So that's encapsulated in Fund 39. And again, you'll see two rows of activity, really 675 long-term bond principal, $14,225,000. Again, that was the complete fulfillment of the debt acquired back in January of 2013, if I recall correctly. for the construction of Fruzen Intermediate School and then improvements to the other district buildings that were part of that package as well. And then the row immediately below is the interest expenses, $226,350. So total expenses to support or to pay off that debt, $14.4 million. And again, if you look to the right, you'll see that that's significantly higher than March of 22, March of 23, and then the fiscal year to date. Keep in mind that, again, we had a substantial principal payment utilizing those funds that the district had previously acquired or received through the tax levy to prepay that debt. Speaking of prepayment of that debt, just a reminder to the board, the committee, and the public that doing so provides a long-term savings of approximately $775,000 to the taxpayers. That's money that we won't have to collect in future years to make interest payment on those outstanding debt obligations. So that was a good move for all. Any questions on Fund 39? Real quick, big picture, Fund 50, page 8. Expenses were down this month simply because we didn't receive an invoice from Chartwells for their services they provided to the district. The invoice didn't come in time. I'm okay with us hanging on to the money that would otherwise be due them. So our expenses for the month actually are only $77,800, whereas in comparison, it was $368,000 last year. Of course, that said, here probably in April, next month when we review April, we'll probably see 2 payments to Chartwells, so our expenses will look significantly higher, but that explains why that is, and just kind of pointing that out for the board as well. And then real quick, I just want to scroll to the very end and we'll look at expenses on the big picture again. $24.1 million this year, $13.6 million last year. And again, the reason for that vast difference is the significant prepayment payoff of that Fund 39 debt that the board utilized this year. And then you'll see the same implications if you look at fiscal year to date activity, $74.4 million this year, $68.4 million last year. Again, driven largely in part by that prepayment. With that, I'll pause and ask if there's any questions. And if not, I think I'm done. And then I'd ask for the board for approval of the financials, or to send that, I guess, to the school board for their approval.
Any committee members have any other questions? No? Any non-committee members have any questions? All right, I just want to say, I know we posed some questions to you ahead of time. Mr. Chading, you did a great job answering. Thank you for doing that. I think it, makes this portion flow very smoothly, so I appreciate that.
You bet.
That being said, I would entertain a motion to recommend our March financials to the full board.
So moved.
And I will second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to item 3A, district facilities, consideration related to sale of real property.
I'll start this conversation off. And so, first of all, let me just say to the board, at our previous meeting back in April, we had a conversation around, at the full board, conversations around our sale of some of our properties, or conversations around properties that we have that we will need to start having additional conversations with. It fell in line with, after the referendum, looking at the possibilities of additional funds coming into the district, and the possibilities of us doing away with these properties. But we also wanted to make sure the board was aware that we had already, of course, started to think about some of those conversations at the district level. As you can tell, there is a policy that asks us to, of course, come back to the committee and look at the conversations around, what would you all like us to, to consider continuing doing, and or if there are some new ideas from our last month's conversation to this month's conversation that we would like to kind of, pencil through. I think it's very important to note that in the presentation itself, Mr. Chade, if you mind sliding down to like 3 slides after this one, please.
You bet.
Right, keep going, right there. I'm sorry, up
Up.
one more, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Right there, considerations, thank you. We had some considerations in place that we wanted the board to consider. Naturally, we can develop our RFP, we can contact real estate broker and agent, we can consider use of auction services. Of course, we can seek professional appraisals, and we can use real estate broker agent to provide a market assessment analysis. I can tell you that we have, from a district perspective, started to look into how much it'll cost to do certain things to the buildings that we currently have. The 2 buildings that we're talking about will be the McNeil Building and the Wright Building. Naturally, our job at the district level is to get as much information as possible, and then, of course, bring that to the board for possible considerations. Here, I can just share with you that at our November conversations with our, I like to call them our facilities construction managers, when we were out to looking at how much our facilities cost and what we need to do to upgrade them to fix them. We know that these 2 buildings are buildings that we're, of course, no longer using, but it still costs to naturally upkeep them, as we have to keep up with the basic levels of operations. It's important that we note that in that space, our goal is to just keep the buildings as updated as possible. Of course, we know we're not using them, but we also need to make some decisions, like I've already previously stated, around what we really want to do with the facilities. I will have Mr. Chady just talk real briefly around some of the things that we have already kind of looked into, just to give the board some general information, as well as Mr. Bricko, if he so chooses as well. So I turn it over to Mr. Chady at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Garrison. So we've got the 2 facilities, Wright School and then McNeil School, that we've not utilized this year from an educational perspective. Both buildings have been utilized for storage to some extent, McNeil more so than Wright, but even Wright has some items in it as well. Throughout the course of this year, surprisingly, we've not had many vandalism incidents at Wright, though we have had some vandalism and some entry. I wouldn't say forced entry, but entry into McNeil as well. Both buildings continue to have utility services. We continue to plow snow when that happens. We'll need to mow grass when that happens. With them being utilized as storage and some other programming, there are generally staff in McNeil, probably daily. Somebody's in there for some reason. Wright School, probably less frequently. But the buildings are just sitting there, and I think the public's wanting to know, what are we going to do with the facilities? And quite honestly, I think we're just looking for some direction as to what does the board, the committee, want us to do so that we can go about doing our diligence accordingly. Both facilities are really, I think, prime for potential residential development of some sort. Wright Elementary School has apartment complex, I don't want to say condo, but perhaps affordable living opportunity if the right developer were to come along. McNeil, I've had a bunch of people talk about McNeil for all sorts of different things. In my perspective, McNeil and its entire acreage, and I forget, let's see if I have that here on one of the prior slides. How many acres do we have? Oh, I don't think I got it. How many, you remember how much, was it like 27 acres? 25 acres or thereabouts. The challenge with McNeil is we got this big school sit kind of right in the middle of all that acreage. So, that whole acreage would be prime residential development opportunities, apartment complexes, duplexes, single-family homes. However, somebody's got to remove the school that sits in the middle of the property. I don't see could that facility be subdivided, so to speak, and leased out or, to various entities perhaps? But when you get inside and you start looking at the hallway stuff, there's nothing that currently exists to partition and to segment certain portions of the building. So really, the question is, what do we want to do with that? And what direction should we work towards, if any? If the board simply wants us to hold on to it for another year, more than happy to do that too. But if there's a desire for us to look at parting ways with those facilities, then let's begin that process. We can do, some municipalities, school districts, cities, et cetera, will issue a request for proposal. They'll kind of put the specifications of the building on there, and they'll just put it out there and say request must be received by a date, and they'll see what comes in. Other districts, and the school district of Beloit in the past has utilized a real estate broker or an agent, either Century 21 here in town, and I think there was a CBRE commercial, something like that, that has assisted the district with prior real estate transactions as well. So we can do that. And honestly, I would say perhaps the course or the last option would be utilizing an auction service. I think we would have a better opportunity to receive marketable value out of using one or two than we would at probably a reduced value, parting ways with the buildings at auctions. And no better examples to that than if we scroll back a few slides here, previously owned district facilities, you'll see, McGlennigan Elementary School was sold back in December of 15 through a real estate broker. The asking price was $375,000. The district was offered that amount, and then our net proceeds after closing fees, et cetera, were $347,000. In comparison, Royce Elementary School was sold at auction less than a year later, and it had a winning bid of $68,200, and we netted $54,000. I think it's also important for the committee and the public to understand the potential net proceed value, because I think some people look at these facilities and think you're going to sell those and you're going to walk away with $4 to $5 million. I wish that were the case, but I think it'll be significantly less than that. And really the big question is, if we were to look to part ways with those facilities and sell them, how would we like to go about establishing an asking price? And I really think there's two different routes we go, and maybe we do both. One is perhaps we can seek the services of a professional real estate appraiser to come in and appraise our properties at Wright and McNeil. Or option two is that we can go through a real estate broker, an agent, and ask them to come in and provide a market value assessment analysis, much like they would do coming in and looking at a personal residence and putting a value on that. The challenge there is, perhaps the challenge with both of these is, you don't sell a lot of schools, right? So you don't dispose of a lot of schools. So trying to get that appraised value, the assessed value appropriately marked might be a little bit challenging. More importantly, though, both the appraisal or the real estate agent are going to have much more experience than I.
And so for the board, for the committee to consider, our top two options are, as already Mr. Chady has mentioned. And so we just wanted to have a discussion again to see kind of where you all as a committee would like us to, lean our efforts, because we are ready to make some changes in these properties. We have fielded conversations about McNeil, more for McNeil than I have for Wright. And so, not knowing the direction the board would like for us to proceed, I always have to give we're thinking about it. Thank you for sharing. It's something that's coming soon. We're interested. We don't want you to turn away any thoughts. And so this is something that we need you all to kind of give us direction, because that allows us to move in that direction much faster.
All right, any comments from the committee?
Yes. Well, I think we should. I think the school district should move forward with divesting McNeil. I mean, $11 million over 3 years is a lot of money. The real estate outfit that you mentioned there, Mr. Chady, was CRBE. That's C.D. Richard Ellis. They're a large commercial real estate broker countrywide.
Yep.
But I think trying to get an independent appraisal would be probably the best. I don't know in the area if the real estate brokers here are, I don't know if they're savvy on selling commercial real estate. Like, I don't-
Right,
so-
right.
However, in the state of Wisconsin, I would think that there are other districts that are selling. In fact, I know for a fact that I think Green Bay district unloaded a property or two last year, or were going to. I don't know if they did or not.
Right.
So
Yep.
I think through our network that we should be able to find somebody that we could get some information on, and you kind of get the ball rolling because
Right. Yeah, I can certainly reach out, put a request or an RFP out, or just simply contact 3, 4, 5 different appraisal firms and ask them, about their experience, willingness, costs to come in and to do that for us. I think that's probably a good first step. Even if we were to engage a real estate broker, Century 21 here in town, Caldwell Banker Commercial out of Janesville, CBRE, whomever, at least then we have an independent perspective and valuation determined by somebody outside that then should be beneficial to us as well. Yep.
yep, I would agree.
Okay.
I got a couple thoughts. So I think, one thing is, I've heard a lot of people have a desire to control the use of the buildings, right? Hey, it'd be nice if McNeil was this. It'd be nice if we could do this with Wright, and yeah, it'd be great. But I think we need to come to an understanding that either we hold it and we control it and wait until someone wants to do something that we want them to do with it, and that's going to cost us money. We didn't do it with any of the other properties, right? We don't control what's going on at McGlenigan or Royce or anything else, right? So I think we have to come to, the understanding that we need to sell the buildings. It's what someone does with it, good for them, right?
Somewhat, I would say, and agree with you. However, I think it would be wise and in the best interest of the district to include some deed restrictions on potential uses of those facilities.
Sure, nope, and I agree with that. Banks do it all the time too, right?
Right.
So, yep, I agree with that.
Yep.
And then I would say that I think a broker like a CBRE would be a good first step, even more so than an appraisal, because the way they're compensated is based on percentage of sale of the property. And I think what you're going to get with an appraisal is, here's what this property is worth as is. I think it's likely that this property, like McNeil, doesn't get used as is. It's probably a tear down, right? And so I think an appraisal is going to give you a value that doesn't mean much to the next person. So an offer you get, someone's calculated in their mind, hey, what's going to cost me another $800,000 just to tear the building down and give it redevelopable land, right? So I think we'd end up with an appraisal where we're saying, oh, this is how much we want now, but that's not what a buyer's going to look for. But a CBRE would be able to market that property, and they can produce before pictures, after pictures, some potential uses, and go out to a market, a national market, of somebody that may want to come in and build that great housing complex, or something like that. So I think the CBRE broker type approach, a national broker, is going to get you the best return and the best reach. Nothing against a local broker, but it is a unique property,
Right.
and it's going to require kind of a unique buyer.
So how about if we reach out and contact CBRE, begin the process with them? For comparison purposes, I contact Caldwell Banker Commercial out of Janesville. Just, apples to apples, see what either both entities can do. And then I guess the real question is, do we also contact Century 21 and engage them further in in such matters also. I don't know.
I mean, you can, I think what you'd find is they say that's not a property we'd be able to market effectively. I think that's what they'd say. Doesn't mean you couldn't ask them.
Yeah.
There's no harm to make the phone call.
Okay.
I think that gives us direction we can start with.
Yep.
It's in our considerations, and we thank the board for, at least letting us kind of explore that. Naturally, just because we're exploring it doesn't necessarily mean, something's going to necessarily come out of it, but we can at least start to explore it and that give us the information to bring back to the board, and then we can take it a step further from there.
Sure.
Committee.
Sure, and before we close out the thoughts on this, is there any non-committee members that have any comments? Tom?
Yeah, I agree with divesting of the properties, but I really think that McNeil and are two totally different animals, and the 27 to 28 acres is out there is way different than, so if we go to whatever and I know that's to be decided down the road, that maybe there's two different venues for doing that. Also, you guys are pretty much aware of tax credits and through the county, and I know they're working with the city on some of their housing projects currently. I know the window on some of that stuff is going to close real quick on their ESSER funds, the counties. There's also, in the future, to look at as an option, the city creating a TIF for development in that area also. I don't know, there's lots of options out there. I just don't want to, and I know we're just discussing it, but I really am in favor of divesting, spending the maintenance costs on that is, and we're not going to use it anymore.
Right. The buildings are both going to continue to depreciate in value, right? So quite honestly, the sooner that we do something, probably the stronger our returns will be on it. So, yeah.
Thanks for the opportunity to participate. Couple of questions, and I just wanted to clarify, have we reached out to the city of Beloit to see if there's any interest in any kind of collaborative project at all?
I have spoken with the city.
Okay.
As it pertains to collaboration, it's a little bit difficult because they have to get money for the same thing that everyone else has to. So collaboration is necessarily not off the table, but at the current time, they have to ask to get money as well to put into this.
That's good to know. I'm wondering if when this comes back, would it be possible for us as a full, whether it's at the committee level or as a full board, just to kind of get a sense of given the opportunity or ARPA funds or grant money or what, if the means were to materialize somehow, I guess for me, I would be curious to know what the city might possibly be considering, because I think it's important for us to consider just the needs of the community. I mean, we're a school district, and it's of course important to be fiscally responsible school district. We also have to be responsible to our community, they're our constituents, and so I want to be considerate partners with other entities involved. So thank you for that. Have we and I realize sympathetic to what you're saying about the sort of urgency to act soon. Have we considered hosting some sort of community listening session? Perhaps with folks who are local to that area, but certainly open to everybody, just to kind of get a pulse, not to say that we're going to, I just think it's important to kind of take people's thoughts into consideration. I think we did something, it was a little, that got conflated with some other stuff, but I know at some point we did that with the Even Start piece. Is that something that we could consider doing before this comes back?
Well, I think that's twofold. I think maybe.
Sure.
I think maybe. I think it's the best way for me to answer that.
Okay.
It's much more of a community campaign almost to get information out about that space, and then of course the listening session at that space. It'll take a little bit more planning. So
totally understand.
maybe.
No, and I just wanted to put the thought into the conversation. I understand that there are processes ongoing, and you're just giving us a high level view, and I definitely appreciate that. My last question is just thinking back to our enrollment study, and given I'm not sure what slide number it is. Let me just double check. There's not slide number. So 1, 2, 3, the one where it's got the previously owned district facilities with Burge, McLennigan, et cetera. Looking at those rates of return, the net proceeds, it's not that those numbers aren't significant, but in the long run, that's like a flash in the pan, kind of Band-Aid type net, right? And so I understand that there are a lot of moving parts that would have to occur to make this happen, but I'm personally still really interested in seeing if it's possible to develop that into some kind of a housing opportunity, given that like one of the highest marked reasons on our enrollment study for declining enrollment was due to lack of availability of affordable housing. So I would just like to prioritize that. And again, just sort of putting some thoughts into this space. I think it's really important for our kids to have opportunities to like live sustainably in our district in an affordable way.
Perfect. Any other thoughts on district facilities? Okay. No action to take there. That was just for discussion. We'll move on to item 4A, update on depositories of district funds.
Yeah, so when I was reviewing school board policies 661, Rule 1, and 661 itself, both speak to the depository of district funds. And it states that the Board of Education shall annually designate primary depositories for school district funds. Looking through it, I noted that that was omitted last year for probably various purposes, and it doesn't really matter, but more importantly, we wanted to update that. And what I did is I took a look at the depositories that are currently listed in board policy. And then I went to the Greater Beloit Chamber of Commerce and I looked at the financial activities, or I'm sorry, the financial institutions that are members thereof and that are local to Beloit, or with one exception, local in Clinton, and that being Town Bank. And what I did is I simply thought, you know what, instead of just limiting those depository institutions that we currently have monies invested in, why not list all of them that are local, thereby providing the business office with a little bit more flexibility in case it was determined that somebody had a special CD rate or something that we wanted to take advantage of, et cetera. So we've updated the listing to reflect current names for everybody. As an example, Blackhawk Bank was our former current, though it was acquired by First Mid Bank and Trust back in December, they closed. And then, it listed the local government investment pool, which many people may not know. It's actually administered by the Department of Administration within the state of Wisconsin, so we updated that as well. And then I simply included in those other financial institutions that are members of the Greater Beloit Chamber of Commerce to provide a more holistic approach. So we talk a little bit about the why and the how. The last part that I'll talk about is within Rule 1, 661, Board Policy Rule 1, it talks about an annual review and action by the school board. It certainly can stay, but I guess my proposal is that if the committee, the board is willing to accept a broader listing of financial institutions, that I'm not sure that there needs to be an annual review of those financial institutions and time spent on that from year to year. But that's your call, not mine, so.
Any comments?
Well, I hear what you're saying, and I tend to agree. However, wouldn't it be prudent to actually look at it annually, because some of these financial institutions may be gone, they may be merged, they may, how,
Right, yep, so.
you have more experience in that than I do.
Right, no, I would agree. Does it have to be an annual thing that we don't follow our own policy? Because you didn't follow it last year. Or is it better left as those changes occur and are identified, that we bring it back for updates? There are lots of things that need review, right? But not everything needs board action and review annually, is, I guess, my point.
What's in you?
So my only thought is I love having more options. I think that's good for the district. That being said, I would also love to, take Megan's lead and say, hey, it's still really nice if we truly stay local and just
Right.
because you have, now this may come off wrong and just because I work for a local bank, but not my intention at all.
And your local bank wasn't even listed in the past, but it would be if this is approved.
Right. But I would say because a bank has a local office that you can see doesn't make them a local bank, right? And so
Right.
I would still encourage that the banks that participate locally in our community, that we can partner with in some way. I think Blackhawk has traditionally done a great job. First Mid's going to continue to do a great job, I think, until proven otherwise. It's been very short term so far. We'll see, right?
Right.
But I think there needs to be a component of that in again who we partner with. For a big part of our finances, like we would partner with, who does our other services that we hire out for third party. So, some of the ones that on the list, like the Wells Fargo and some of those, that makes me cringe a little bit because, if they had a building right next door, that's great,
Right.
but they wouldn't be a local
Right.
business, right? So,
Yep.
as for the annual review, I think, we're probably on a 3-year RFP cycle for banking services.
I don't even know, honestly. Yeah.
Whatever that policy is, I wouldn't mind it mirroring that to say, hey, when we go to take this out to reevaluate our banking options, that'd be the time to say, okay, well, who do we want to send it out to? Let's update the list, send it out to those people.
Right.
Because that's probably more appropriate on either a 3-year or 5-year cycle,
Yeah.
typically.
Yeah, I don't believe that the board has any firm policy that speaks to financial institutions and when that review takes place. You talked a little bit earlier about Blackhawk or First Mid, and I'll just share that, the school district intentionally chose Blackhawk Bank through an RFP process at some point in the past. And when the opportunity presents itself, I'll remind First Mid Bank and Trust that we're with them by default, not by choice. Because we didn't choose them, they acquired Blackhawk Bank, and some of the experiences are just different.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
that'd be my way of reminding them of how and why we're there. Yeah.
Would it be, I would be okay with, if we said, would this be something we should refer to policy committee to say, hey, let's take a look at what this looks like. Let's maybe take out this annual piece, like at your recommendation, so that we're not in violation of it, because I don't like to be in violation of our own policies. And then 2, make sure there is some groundwork around how often and when we do put the work in. I know it's work to do an RFP for everything, just like, our IT services and everything else that we've gone through lately. But I think we could probably work through policy committee on that.
I agree. I think
Okay.
policy committee is somewhere we can go back to make sure that we are, meeting the needs of the board. I would like to remind us that the time is 6:40.
So are we still looking for any action? Would you like this list updated as of today so that we remain in policy that we have done that?
I think we're good. I think we can route this to policy. It won't make tomorrow's agenda, obviously, but it can certainly come back in June there and go through the process and would still be fine. So, our current financial institutions are covered under our current board policy rules that are currently in place. So we're just simply looking to be a little bit more encompassing with the greater Beloit community and the financial institutions doing business here.
Perfect.
Really quick, if I may, we're missing Teachers Credit Union from the list.
Is that not the same as Educators Credit Union?
It is not the same, and
Okay.
actually Tom McCann, one of our wonderful teacher alum, as I believe still their president, and they do wonderful things for teachers in the community. Wanting to echo what Brian Anderson was just talking about, so thank you.
Thanks for pointing that out.
Okay, we'll leave that in your hands to move forward to policy and leave that there. We'll move on to item 5A, next meeting date. This committee will meet on Tuesday, June 4th, 5:30 p.m., if anybody wants to join us for that. We'll move on to item 5B. I'd entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
I will second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? That carries. We are adjourned, and we'll have HR committee start in just a few moments.
Okay, I am going to call to order the Human Resources Committee at 6:41. May we get a roll call, please?
Greg Schneider. Tom Hankins. Brian Nichols.
Here.
Brian Anderson.
Here.
Megan Miller.
Present?
Amy Levy.
Here.
And Tia Johnson.
Here.
All members are present except Greg Schneider.
Can I get an approval of the agenda?
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Any nays? Motion approves. Oh, I'm sorry, it was moved by Brian Nichols and seconded by Brian Anderson. May I get an approval of the minutes for April 16th?
I move approval of the minutes from April 16th and April 23rd.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion by Amy Levy to move the approval of April 16th minutes and April 23rd minutes with a second by Megan Miller. All in favor? Aye.
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 Nays? Motion approves. That brings us to employment recommendations. A motion may be made to convene the HR committee into closed session pursuant to Section 19.85, Parent 1, Parent C of the Wisconsin State Statutes relative to considering employment recommendation exhibits. Does anyone want to go into closed session? Hearing no motions, can I get an approval of the, or a motion for the employment recommendations Exhibit A?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Amy Levy, seconded by Brian Nichols. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We will approve the closed session minutes at our next meeting date, which will be,
Actually, if we go into closed session, it'll be
thank you. Our next meeting date is May 21st. May I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Amy Levy, seconded by Brian Nichols. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. This meeting is adjourned. We have 1 minute until the meeting begins. Good evening. It is 7 o'clock. I am calling to order the regular board meeting of the School District of Beloit Board of Education. May I get a roll call, please?
Yes. Megan Miller,
Present?
Tom Hankins,
Here.
Brian Anderson,
Here?
Brian Nichols,
Here?
Amy Levy,
Here.
Greg Schneider, and Tia Johnson.
Here.
All members are present except Greg Schneider.
Thank you. Can I get an approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Motion moved by Brian Nichols, seconded by Megan Miller. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. The Pledge of Allegiance, from now on in the future, we're having a slight change in our form, and we're going to request students and representatives of the school district be present and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Seeing that we have students here tonight, are there any students that would be willing to lead us in tonight's Pledge of Allegiance? I bet Mr. Hoey would give extra credit. Okay, well, please stand. Tonight, I have the board president in a different location, and you will understand why in just a minute. Good evening, board members, staff, friends, neighbors, students, and families. 15 years ago, the first district event I attended as a newly elected board member was the quarter-century annual banquet. The banquet hall was packed, and I had spent a bit too much time socializing and trying to meet as many of the educators as possible. Salads were already being served before I realized I had better find a seat. There was one seat available in the back of the room. I asked the gentleman, who was already eating his salad, if the seat next to him was taken. Without looking up, he responded, "No, go ahead," in a typical Midwest nice manner. Sitting down, I turned to him, eagerly offering a handshake and enthusiastically, "Hi, I'm the new board member, Tia Johnson." The color from his face quickly drained. Accepting my handshake, he replied, "I'm Arnie Lee." This is significant because not even a month prior to our chance seating proximity, Mr. Lee had written a scathing editorial in the Beloit Daily News about me as a candidate. He indicated I was too radical and too liberal. Although I wanted to be seated anywhere else at that moment, I chuckled and said, "Well, this should be an interesting dinner." Mr. Lee, who had been a longtime employee and servant of the district, and I talked about what we each believed contributes to a high-quality education. We talked about what was working well and what needed to be improved in our school district. By the time dessert arrived, we had found in one another respect and of friendship. We were friends who both cared deeply for Beloit students, staff, and public education. My purpose for sharing this story tonight with you is to remind all of us not to make assumptions about one another, to encourage everyone to initiate a genuine discussion and to try to begin with finding common ground as we consider approaches to creating a more successful school district of Beloit. I want to introduce to you your Board of Education and highlight some ways they make this board richer and stronger. Greg Schneider has experience in the community as building bridges between groups and organizations, and he brings a sense of tranquility to very difficult situations. Greg is focused on making improvements for our students. Amy Levy has a keen attention to detail and an incredible intellect with quick and accurate information processing skills. Amy is focused on making improvements for our students. Megan Miller has a passion for humanity that brings out the best in people. Her leadership qualities include her energy, positivism, and eloquence. Megan is focused on making improvements for our students. Brian Anderson has an astute comprehension of business and finance. A team player, he is consistent and works in a grounded yet casual manner. Brian is focused on making improvements for our students. New member Tom Hankins' strengths include his ability to network and befriend people from all backgrounds. He has taken on the task of learning board protocols and norms faster than any other board member I've ever met. Tom is focused on making improvements for our students. Last summer, recently appointed to the board again, I was seated next to Brian Nichols, someone I had never even met or had a conversation with. At that time, I believed there was no one on the board that could have been more opposite me in my life experience, values, and personality. Just as I had experienced with Mr. Lee 15 years ago, it was a refreshing surprise to find a new friend with a passion for helping all Beloit students have the best educational opportunities provided to them here in the school district of Beloit. As I talked with Brian and I tried to find differences to highlight, I found we are more alike than different. I believe this to be true of any of us. Once we start listening and openly sharing who we are, we find we are more alike than different. Board member Brian Nichols is not a Beloit native, but I know he would run into any burning building to save the life of any one of us, especially our students and staff. Brian Nichols is contemplative and thorough in his decision-making, weighing the immediate effects and the long-term consequences of the choices he must make as a board member. Brian is focused on making improvements for our students. I appreciate the commitment, patience, and sacrifice we all must make to serve the school district of Beloit. Even with our differences, we all understand and accept the profoundness of the job ahead of us. We must make the largest budget reductions in the district's history. We are facing the same problems that are plaguing schools across the nation: teacher shortages, absenteeism, student behavior, public frustration, and diminishing efforts to obtain academic excellence for all students. For Beloit, these issues are amplified with higher rates of poverty, systemic racism, childhood health problems, and higher rates of homelessness. There are systemic issues that are outside this board's purview. We must work in collaboration with agencies and organizations that are better equipped to handle some of these community issues. We must invite Beloit citizens, businesses, and other governmental services to give us a hand. This is a community-wide problem, and we must find solutions in a community-wide manner. Before anyone jumps to conclusions or tries to put words in my mouth, no one is turning over the keys to the district to anyone. We 7 listen to you, our constituents, but the decisions are made by the vote of these 7 individuals. Our agenda is to make improvements to the district, not to follow or be dictated to by any group, ideology, or political party. I encourage everyone to pause when discussing the school district of Beloit and possible decisions. Please ask yourself, are you contributing to the conversation positively or destructively? Are your facts and figures legitimate? Meaning, can you follow them to their original source, and is that a valid, non-biased source? What other realistic solutions can you offer to the criticisms you have? Friends, I am requesting much of you tonight. I ask you to put politics aside, put the focus on the students' future, and put our egos away. Let's be the change we want to see for Beloit. Let's create a school district of Beloit that draws potential residents and businesses to our beloved community. Let's create a future for our community and students that will empower them for decades to come. Let's lead with love, compassion, and hope. I would like to give a big thank you and congratulations and job well done to the students who attended yesterday's Build and Bridge event at Lambeau Field. I am looking forward to hearing more about your experience with the Green Bay Packers. In closing, it is my intention to no longer have a president's report, as the work of the board is reflected in its committees and the committee reports. Thank you for your support.
So I'm up next at the superintendent's report. First of all, I would like to say thank you to everyone that's here in the room today. It's always good to see our students and, of course, community members a part of our meetings. It is Teachers Appreciation Week, and so I would like to just take a moment and let's give all of our teachers in the school district of Beloit just a round of applause. I think it's so important to show appreciation and thanks to everyone that has done so much for us, and especially our teachers. You know, teachers, they have inspired me every day, and your patience and dedication have personally changed my life. I think it's important that I put a pause there, because sometimes we talk about teachers, and I got to first stop and think, I had a great teacher when I was growing up. His name was Mr. Rushing. And Mr. Rushing, for me, like many teachers, did that one thing that I really wish that every teacher could do. He challenged me in many different ways. Now, most of y'all don't know this, so I'm gonna be a little personal now. He knew my nickname. My nickname was Brad, all right? And he was like, Brad? He knew my nickname, okay? It's like, Brad, I know your parents, I know your father, I know your mother, and they would want me to challenge you in this classroom as a science teacher. And Mr. Rushing really taught me at that moment that, number one, I didn't know as much as I thought I knew, okay? And number two, he taught me that it's okay for me to be me in the classroom. He taught me it was okay for me to be me in the classroom. And that really meant a lot to me. And I know we have teachers in the school district of Beloit that brings out the best in all of our students, and in essence, all of us, because they show up every day, they do the job of teaching and educating our kids, or for some of us, your children, and they do it time in and time out. And I would just like, again, to say thank you so much for your contributions to the students and families in our school districts. Teachers, you've made a difference in so many lives, and again, that includes everyone in this room, and that's including me. And so again, I want to say thank you to all of the teachers in the school district of Beloit for all that you do. And a big shout out to one of my favorite teachers, Mr. Rushing, who has since, unfortunately, I get a little choked up when I think about it, passed away. And I wanted to reach back out to him. I did. And so one day in college, I reached back out to Mr. Rushing, and to find out, unfortunately, he had passed away. But I wish I had a chance to reach back out to him and say, of course, when he was living, just thank you for doing that amazing thing of really challenging me and allowing me to be myself in the classroom. Additionally, since I couldn't say thank you to Mrs. Rushing, I started thinking about that other teacher, because you have many, hopefully. If you got one, that's a blessing, right? And so I reached out to my other teacher, Mrs. Purnell. Mr. Purnell was my math teacher, and I was able to, just say thank you. And so those moments are very important. And so I wanted to take this time and be very personal with everyone. And no, you cannot call me Brad. But again, thank you to all the teachers here in the school district of Beloit for all that you do. Yesterday, we had a proclamation, and this actually goes right into the recognitions portion of the agenda. Is it okay if I continue? We had a proclamation that was done at the city level, and it has a lot of whereas, and I'm not going to read all of them as pertains to the proclamation, but I do want to thank the city for recognizing not just the teachers in the school district of Beloit, but just teachers in general. And I'll read a couple of the whereases, and so just to make it official, here's our, right there in the screen. Here's our proclamation from the city. And so let's first give the city a thank you, shout out for them for doing this for everybody. And so I'll read a couple of whereas. The tireless efforts of teachers extend beyond the classroom, encompassing hours spent preparing lessons, cultivating positive relationships, assessing progress, providing guidance, and nurturing the holistic development of each student. We want to say thank you. Whereas our teachers serve as catalysts, expanding horizons, equipping students with the skills and knowledge they need to thrive academically and beyond. We want to say thank you. Whereas through their mentorship, care, and guidance, the educators profoundly impact the lives of students and families. And so again, I wanted to make sure that I read a few of the proclamations. Again, we will all, of course, post this here in our boardroom because it is Teacher Appreciation Week. And once again, I would like to say thank you to all the teachers for everything that you do for the school district of Beloit. And that is my report for this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Garrison. This brings us to our first board recognition of 2024, and I have the great honor and pleasure of recognizing Ms. Naila Adama. Merrill fifth grade teacher, Ms. Adama, is a recipient of the Herb Cole Educational Foundation Teacher Fellowship Award. This award is presented annually to only 100 teachers. Ms. Adama was nominated for her leadership and service in and outside the classroom, her ability to inspire a love of learning, and her ability to motivate her students. Ms. Adama fosters critical thinking, creativity, and a love for lifelong learning among her students. Beyond her role as a teacher, Ms. Adama actively engages with our school community, organizing extracurricular activities, volunteering her time, and forging connections that extend far beyond the classroom. Ms. Adama is also being recognized by the YWCA of Rock County as a Woman of Distinction. This award recognizes women who serve as outstanding role models and have improved women's lives through community service, professional achievement, integrity, leadership, and dedication to the well-being of others. Most of us in Beloit don't need to be introduced to Ms. Adama. Many of us have heard her name and know of her wonderful work. I reached out to a few people, 6, and ask them to share a few words when Ms. Adama's name comes to mind. Caring, loving, health and wellness. An incredibly energetic teacher who likes to encourage all kids to work to the best of their abilities. I could say so much more, but it's so hard to put into words how much she means to me. She is my inspiration. I am in awe of her every day at what she does and who she is. A brilliant woman. Empathetic, dedicated, empowering, and an amazing human being, quality, adaptable, does not stay stagnant, especially for the sake of helping other people, using her awareness to ensure kids feel loved and protected, cares about the betterment of people and society. With her imperfections, she provides lessons, a framework for life, making sure her shortcomings were not inherited and making sure she showed that flaws were just points to provide humility. I love you, Mom. You're the best of us all. That one is my favorite. Because it is important for us all to remember we are all human, we all have flaws, and we learn from our mistakes. And Ms. Adama, thank you. Today, the Board of Education takes a moment to honor and recognize your work and what you've done. Ms. Naila Adama, thank you for your dedication and commitment to our students, district, and community.
We do have a certificate for Mrs. Adama as well, and Mrs. Johnson will present her with that.
This brings us to public comment time. Each person must complete a public comment card and give it to the board secretary, Michelle Shope. You have 3 minutes to speak. If you need more time, 2 people may yield their time to any individual and must come to the podium and state their name. Ms. Shope, do we have any public comments?
Yes, I have one person in the room that would like to speak.
Okay.
Shirley?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm very tearful. This has been a very moving period. Lots of acknowledgments of happiness and joy. And joy is my favorite word. If you see me, think J-O-Y, and I will smile. I love it. I was talking to a friend today, and I mentioned to her that I was coming here. And I said, what's the problem you think we need to tackle? She said, communication is an issue everywhere. Connecting the 2 dots between the child, the parent, the teachers, staff, and administration. Mental health is something that all of us are dealing with. Mental health affects the family, and we all are family. If we don't think right, we cannot live right. She said we need to think about bettering the system to perfection. Talking the talk and doing the walk. We need to make it perfection. We have one goal: success for all. Unity is building strength. Unity has our strength. And that's for all of us to concentrate on, the word unity. I'm making a personal request. I am a parent of the district. And some of you guys know my son, Gaia. And he's married a wonderful person. She's actually a physician, a very brilliant physician. And last Thursday, they got a phone call in Boston that her mother had found her brother dead. He was 36 years old. We are investing in the future. Some of them are 5 years old, and some of them are 18, getting ready to go out into the world. If you think at 36, if we had to say bye, what would we say? We are going to say unity. They are going to be proud they attended the Beloit School District. And if you doubt it, just listen to what happened. The board president shared the gifts of each one of the members of the board. And I was very tearful. Please, please, let's get out and improve. Improve. Build that perfection that that parent told me today. She's a parent, she's a graduate of the school district, and she's also a grandparent. We have work to do. Let's help. Thank you.
Ms. Shope, were there any other public comments?
I had no other public comments.
No emails?
No.
Thank you. This brings us to committee and other board reports. The first one is Business Operations and the Finance Committee.
Sure, so that committee met earlier this evening. We went over the March monthly financials. We also touched on a very early conversation on, what do we do with some of the buildings we're no longer using. So there'll be a lot more to come on that, so just very early on that. And I would encourage, anyone that wants to hear more to come to those committee meetings, because we do ask what some might find boring questions, but as a banker, I think they're good questions. So, so I'd look forward to seeing more people, but the next opportunity you're going to have is going to be Tuesday, June 4th, 5:30 p.m. right here.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. The next one is Teaching, Learning, Equity, and Pupil Services Committee.
Board President Johnson, since Greg Schneider's the chair and he's unavailable this evening and we gave a report last time, is it okay if we skip?
Certainly.
Thank you.
The Governance Committee did not meet. Are there any legislative updates?
Yes, just two things. I didn't prepare a formal update, but since it is Teacher Appreciation Week, I wanted to highlight for everybody that there is a DPI, where did it go here? There is the UW system has decided to expand its funding for free teacher education for teachers who commit to teaching in Wisconsin. It's a very exciting opportunity, and I see we have a lot of students here this evening, so I would encourage everybody to give that a little Google search, or I'm happy to share that also after the meeting. And I just think that's a wonderful show of investment from the UW system into our students and future teachers. I also, just as the legislative person, want to bring it up that we should probably at some point, and maybe for the governance committee, meeting Board President Johnson, talk about some dates to schedule a legislative session with our representatives. But that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Policy Committee. Are there any updates for the Policy Committee?
As the new policy chair who hasn't met yet, I have nothing to report. Our meeting is tomorrow at 5:30, so I
Okay.
will be ready to go next month.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to action and discussion items. The first one is the board meeting cadence review. Dr. Garrison?
All right, so last month, we discussed this conversation and a few times before then, both at the Governance Council session and then again at the full board. In that same conversation, the board did ask me to, bring this back here on May the 7th for an additional conversation. And I first wanted just to let everyone know that the cadence that we currently have does start us, have a regular start time of 5:30 because we have committee meetings. And then, of course, we have our HR meeting that starts at 6:30. That runs right up until our 7 o'clock Board of Education meeting. And then that goes until we're completed. One of the things that I would like to propose to the board for an option from a time perspective is the cadence that you all have seen now for a few times. I believe that our opportunities as a full board to ask the questions as a full, in essence, a full committee, allows us to all get the information at the same time. Oftentimes what has happened is we may have questions at the committee level. They get all answered, right? And then we, of course, move certain items to the full board. And once they get to the full board, it gets over and into the consent agenda. Once it's in the consent agenda, other board members who may have not had a chance to listen and or come to any of the committee meetings may have questions. And so those consent agenda items are then can be pulled off of the regular consent agenda opportunity, and naturally we have a full presentation again with questions. And so I think right now, as it stands, we have repeated a lot of our opportunities as an administration, and allowing it to come to the full board all at once could allow for us to answer all the questions right at once. And then it'll also give us the opportunity to bring back responses from the full board all at once as well. Because we may have questions at the committee, we go back and answer, and it comes back again sometimes, and then it goes to the full board, and then we got a full board questions, it goes away and come back again. And so this will allow us to be a little bit more efficient with our time, in my opinion. Additionally, when I'm thinking about committee work, and then of course we'll open up for conversations, when I'm thinking about committee work, the committees won't necessarily go away, because as a full board, we can say if we're spending a lot of time in a certain conversation, the chairs and of course the board president can say, you know what, this seems like this needs more time in the committee. The committee can then open up the opportunity for the committee meeting to happen, share more conversations, and then it comes right back to the full board again. And so we would just be, in essence, suspending policy for this to work. However, if we ever want to spend more time on an item, we can always bring it back to the committee. Now, we also have a wonderful opportunity in the start time conversation. And typically our board meetings have started at 7 o'clock and or later. And out of full transparency, we know that our goal is to always start on time and end on time. But sometimes there's things that we take more time in. Okay, and as a board and as a district administrator, I have to be honest with you all and say we never want our guests to be waiting when we start any 7 o'clock regular board meeting. And I just want to put it on the table because I think it's very important that we, honor that space of people coming and really wanting to, share and be on their way just as much as we want to do the same thing. And we have had to run over at times with our HR conversations for various reasons, and rightfully so. There's conversations that we have to have as a board, and these board conversations are very important. But when it gets in the way of our regular board meeting and or time frame for our regular board meeting, it does send a message to others who don't know what we are possibly talking about in the closed session Are we respecting their time? Is there something going wrong? Is there something going on? It just sends out more questions when we start after that 7 o'clock time frame. In this setting, we could start our regular board meetings at 5:30 because we will be doing away with the committee sessions. And the reason why I say I'm doing away with the committee sessions is because if you look at the screen, our first Tuesday of each month, we typically have our Business Operations and Finance Committee meeting. Now we would just start with that at 5:30. We'll start with the Business Operations and Finance conversations, a general board item. I always say a general board item because as I work with the board president in many different ways, we set certain agenda items. And then, of course, we can bring HR right back to the conversation. Secondly, on the third Tuesday of each month, we have our Teaching, Learning, Equity, and People Services conversation. And then we can have, again, on a general board item, or items, I should say. And then, of course, HR. Once again, this allows us to start at that 5:30 time and still capture everything that we would do, but it'll be a full board. And if we, again, need more time on any specific item, we can always elect for that committee to reestablish itself, meet, to spend more time on that item. We will not need to suspend our current policy committee. I'm sorry, we will need to suspend current policy in HR, TLE, People Service, and Board of Education, and the regular Board of Education meeting times because we'll be changing the times, of course. But the policy committee will remain intact, and that'll be on the first Wednesdays at 5:30. Because it's kind of hard to say we're going to squeeze policy in a regular board meeting because it could take much more time. So I believe that keeping policy as it is, where it is for the current time would make the most sense. And we can still have that meeting at 5:30 or earlier, depending on the board's availability. And again, like I've been saying, committees may remain intact and can meet between 4 and 5:30 if needed on items that may need additional discussion. And so I bring this to the board as I would really like to try this as a district administration for various reasons for all of our time. I do believe that it makes a longer day for everybody when we start a 7 o'clock meeting and go till 10 or 10:30 or whatever time we typically would end up getting out of here. And it's not the fact that I don't have the energy, because everyone knows I have a lot of energy, but I believe that it's also not necessarily effective when we are trying to make some real tough decisions at wee hours at nighttime in the committee or in a full board conversation. And so being able to start just a tad bit earlier, if the board would indulge in this conversation, could possibly happen because we already start at 5:30 with the committee meetings.
Thank you, Dr. Garrison. Are there any board members who have questions or would like to weigh in on this?
Sure. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I just wanted to say that I think overall this is a really good idea. I think it's important, and Dr. Garrison, you've really lifted this up in what you shared with us, that we have to humanize the work that we do together, right? This is people work. People work can be kind of messy, and I think honoring where our energies and capacities are and making the best of that time is a very wise suggestion. I wanted just to clarify with regard to committee start time. I would be fine with a 4 o'clock because I saw that was a proposed range out there, but I want to be conscious of everybody's work schedules and things like that. So I just think that if there could be some kind of a discussion, I'd like everybody to kind of weigh in on what we believe is reasonable. Again, just to kind of honor the humanizing the work that you're proposing. And I think just clearly communicating both between ourselves, because it would be something new, and also clearly communicating with the community, when are we talking about the general agenda and things like that. I think people, it's going to take some getting used to, and I want to make sure that we aren't accidentally causing frustration or confusion, right, for people who might want to come for one thing, but maybe not understand how we're rearranging, right? So I guess what's the communication plan for that? So in conclusion, thank you. I think it's a great idea. Just let's talk about the start time and how are we going to communicate with each other and with the community about it.
Thank you. Any other board members? Who had their hand up?
Thank you. Just a couple items. As I'm sure you all know this in policy, but just a reminder, the general policy that covers all of our meetings is 185, and then HR is also governed by 185.5, TLE and People Services 185.2. And then the Board Operations and Finance 185.1. The only portion of policy that we would need to suspend would be policy 185. Technically, the only start time that is mandated by policy is the HR meeting meets on the first and third Tuesday at 6:30. So theoretically, if we move forward with this, that is the only one policy that we would have to suspend that portion. And I would not be in favor of a committee meeting that began before 5:30 because of the reasons that Board Member Miller just stated. My question is, are we still keeping the cadence where our regular board meeting will not start before 7? I'm a big fan on efficiency of time, but if we're beginning at 5:30 and just running concurrently, then an individual who wanted to come and, let's say, join in on public comment, if they arrived at 7, we could already be in the meeting and theoretically past that point. So my question is, will we pause and not begin until a certain time for our regular board members, for our regular board meetings that include public comment?
So in the proposal, we would start at 5:30 and public comment would be technically at the beginning like it is now in the conversation.
So just for clarification, I thought you meant like either business operations and finance or teaching, learning, equity, and pupil services, depending on if it was the first or the third Tuesday, those meetings would start at 5:30.
Oh, no, this would be a regular start of our regular board meeting because we'll be suspending, as you just mentioned, policy 185 so that we can actually start, and my thought, sorry if I'm wrong, start our regular board meeting at 5:30.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm understanding the proposal correctly, there would not be a regular cadence of committee board meetings except for policy unless there was a need for it.
That is correct.
Okay, so regular board meetings would be on the first and third Tuesday of the month, beginning at 5:30 instead of 7.
That's correct.
Okay, and then if there was a need to shift something back to policy, would those meetings be scheduled as members are available? Is there a time that we need to carve out and hold open for committee meetings? And then if we don't have it, that's time that we get back? What is the plan for that?
Sure. So as I mentioned, and I think you bring up a good point, so that everyone is clear, our regular board meetings would start at 5:30. The items that I mentioned here, business operations and finance and general board items, these are the items that we will want to cover still in our regular board meeting because we still have to approve budgets. We still have to approve certain opportunities in our business operations and finance conversation. Additionally, as it pertains to the committees, I mentioned that a start time of, I said in between 4 and 5:30 could be an opportunity from the aspect of if we need to spend more time on a specific item, the committees could come back and meet from 4 to 5:30 on that following Tuesday. That makes sense? And so that we could still capture additional time in an item if needed.
Do you mind pausing there? So
Sure.
let's say we meet on the first Tuesday and we start with the items you have listed, but it's under the header of our regular board meeting. And we say, oh, this needs to go back to business operations and finance. So are you saying that that committee would meet between 4 and 5:30 on the following Tuesday, on that second Tuesday of the month?
I would propose that we meet on that, in this case, the third Tuesday of that month, the committee, because we are already supposed to be here at 5:30, and if the committee could meet from that 4 to 5:30, in between that 4 to 5:30 timeframe, they can capture additional conversations as needed. Since I don't want to add an extra meeting to the board, since we already are coming to that specific day. So if anything, it'll allow us to move additional conversations to the next meeting that we have.
The next meeting week, not the next week.
Next board meeting, I should say, right? So the third. Yeah,
So meetings would only happen on the first and third weeks of the month.
that's correct.
Got it. And then I think my final question, are you recommending that we suspend that portion of policy to do this for a trial period? Or are you recommending that this is our new normal?
I would recommend that we at least try this. That's the way I pitched it earlier when I first brought this to the conversation, because I believe it'll allow us to, to see if we like it as a board. It'll allow us as administration to put this out and communicate it effectively. Hopefully, it'll be something that the board can, get with, if that makes any sense. But it'll also allow us to find our own cadence if this is something that we can actually do. And if not, we can always go back to kind of what we are already doing with starting at 5:30 and unfortunately ending, whenever we get done.
Thank you.
Any other? Yes. Brian Nichols?
My main concern, I think, is in starting the regular board meeting at 5:30 is that I think that eliminates a lot of the public comment that we could get, because people work, and people don't all work around town, and so they got to commute home. We don't want them coming here hungry. We want them to be able to speak there and listen, and I think that's. And sometimes we have numerous speakers, sometimes we have 0, sometimes we have 1, as we did tonight. But my concern is that we're kind of leaving the community out a little bit in not giving them the opportunity to be here as often as they might be here otherwise by starting the regular board meeting at 5:30. That means they got to be here by like 5:45-ish. And, again, I think that's going to restrict public comment.
Brian Anderson?
All right, so first, I love efficiency as much as the next person. And at the sound of being redundant here, I think, what if we move really quickly through? So for example, the Business Finance and Operations Committee, what if that portion of the evening was a 10-minute conversation? As we talked, and I agree with some of the other ones about possibly restricting public comment, because I'm skeptical, but I'm willing to work through this. So what if we move public comment later in the agenda to a spot where, from a practical standpoint, it was still pretty consistent around a certain time? If someone really wants to show up for a certain topic, and they have to get here early to make sure they don't miss it, that's one thing. But when people want public comment, I think that we need to narrow down that bandwidth of when that is, I think, a little bit more, because I don't want to do anything to discourage that. The other thing is, you mentioned we could always bring something back. And so the way it works now, for example, this evening we had our Business Operations and Finance Committee. It's on the agenda to talk about it again that same evening. So I wouldn't know if I wanted to have a committee meeting to talk more in depth about something until we've had the full board meeting portion, right? So maybe a potential solution is when the board agendas come out on Friday, instead of being the items for Tuesday's agenda, is it possible for the agendas that come out on a Friday be for the Tuesday that's 2 weeks from that following Tuesday? You're still doing it you're doing everything every 2 weeks, but we could flush through all these questions. We don't need to talk about, the business and operations and finance. Maybe the financials come out the Friday before the TLE Tuesday, but we'll talk about the business operations and finance on the next one, to kind of let that committee work happen in the background. If I need to call something, I can call something and still maintain all these efficiencies we're trying to capture.
I think so. What you're capturing and the thought is what this trial period could do for us, right? And I don't think that as an administrative team, I think we can, put stuff out early. naturally, we can put stuff out early, but, board members have jobs and they have things they take care of as well. That comes with you all being able to get us back questions in a reasonable amount of time. Like that's something that we try to practice already. And so I do believe we could put things out ahead of time, but again, that space in between naturally, and it gives us plenty of space in between. We just have to plan it out. I will say that as a team, as a team, we're pretty consistent as it pertains to what we have to bring to the board. And so for me, it wouldn't change anything if we was to put stuff out earlier or whenever you guys have time to, and ladies have time to read it.
So here's just the scenario. We'll just kind of walk through it. So Friday, agenda comes out, say 5 o'clock Friday. Let's just say I'm the diligent board member and I'm looking at it on Saturday, gathering my thoughts, and I say to myself, you know what, or one of my committee members say, hey, you know what, I really think this is going to require some more conversation. Now I've got to post a meeting before that upcoming Tuesday. And now maybe we don't, I do my work on Saturday. We got to have this discussion on Sunday. We got to post on Monday to have a 4 p.m. Tuesday committee meeting because all this is on the agenda for this upcoming Tuesday. And so I think,
That's why though, and I see what you're saying, but that's why if we was to hear it as a full board, and then the board, at that conversation, it could be going too long, right? There's a policy that talks about us going too long. We can say, well, this is something we need to, table and bring it back to the committee. Right then let's say tonight on a Tuesday, we can then say, hey, I can post this for another conversation at 4 o'clock the third Tuesday, and if it's the third Tuesday, on the first Tuesday in the following month, so that we will be able to still capture that committee time. That's why I think us having a full board conversation allows us to capture those questions and again, allow us to come back that following Tuesday, well, not following Tuesday, third Tuesday, and have that additional conversation. I understand what you're saying, but I think from an efficiency standpoint, what we're doing currently does present some challenges for my administrative team.
So I guess my last thing, and I'll be quiet so everybody else can chime in too, is all that being said, again, I'm skeptical. I'm willing to try it, but I'd like to have a finite ending time that's going to put this back on the agenda to say, okay, how'd it go? What did everybody think? And
Go from there.
take another kick at it.
Tom Hankins?
Excuse my being a newbie, but why is the policy committee segged out?
So policy, there's hundreds of policies.
No, I understand that.
And so we have to go through hundreds of policies.
Okay.
It's segged out because we wouldn't have enough time in our regular board meetings to delve into more time.
Okay.
We're trying to, I should say, I believe the board is also trying to be more efficient with our time as a team. And I think if we was to add policy back to that conversation or to our regular board meeting, it could take up much more time. Or it could slow the process of how we're actually doing policies now as well, looking at them and, looking at multiple policies, and that's the dedicated time for it. And so that's just, the reason why it's out of its current setting.
Just a little follow-up on, because if we do, and I know Ryan's suggesting, I'm really all in favor of the review session coming up. Current board members notwithstanding, and I'm not sure about everyone's work situation, but if it is enacted after that, it does change the cadence of future board members, whether they want to run or do this way, or I don't know. I'm just thinking 2 steps ahead of it, and I don't want to eliminate anybody because now our meetings start at 4 or 5:30. I know. Fortunately, I'm non-retired now, but I know Mr. Levy had a lot of commitments that precluded. But anyways, I don't want to get into that minutia, but I just think it's worth mentioning. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Go ahead, Ms. Levy.
Thank you. I say we just try it for 6 months. We could theoretically follow back up on this on our December 17th. That'll give us 6 months to try it. We can see what we like, what we don't like. And then the only thing, Board Member Anderson, that you brought up that I would push back on a little bit is having public comment at the end. If someone wants to comment on something before we take action, I'm concerned about us putting it at the end of the meeting. People may feel like they didn't really have a voice before we took action. So that would be my only concern with that.
Go ahead.
Thank you for bringing that up, Board Member Levy, because that was the second comment I was going to bring up. The reason that we put public comment where it was intentionally. However, I think that's a really good idea. So, I mean, I think that's something to chew on about maybe when our start time is. Like, I wonder if our start time just becomes 6 instead of 5:30, which is kind of a nice compromise for folks to be well fed and arrive home from work. And I mean, I don't mean to make light of that. It was a really cute comment, but you're right. I mean, it's not really fair to expect people to like zip over here, right? And I think that's very conscientious and very much in the spirit, right, of what we're being asked to consider. Like, let's consider people's whole person experience, right? So kind of want to put out here, like maybe we could start it just a half hour later, and that might be a good compromise just to start with. But, you know, I'm just kind of curious what other people think about that. And then I guess, so Board Member Anderson, I'm very empathetic. Like, I had a really hard time, like, with this when this first came up in February for pretty much exactly the reasons that you just articulated. So what I've come to, and I don't know if this is helpful, but the reason that a couple years ago we went to that 2 committee, like it comes to committee once for discussion and then it comes back again for action, was to give us time to kind of like digest and deliberate. So the way I'm understanding this is like we're just kind of putting it on the full agenda, so we're essentially a committee of the whole. And if we decide that there's something we need to deliberate on, it's essentially just like coming back again it's really not very much different from what we do now. It just seems like it's more efficient and responsive to like what our administration needs. And that's like kind of how I'm thinking about it, because it's a very different view. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, but I mean, I'd be fine with 5:30. I think I really want to honor, I guess, what Board Member Nichols brought up about people's ability to participate in public comment. It's an important part of our meeting, but I also don't think you can go at the end of the meeting for the reasons that Board Member Levy just articulated.
Any other thoughts? Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, just one other quick follow-up. Yeah, I think we can certainly try it. I think if we're going to try it, we almost need to try 5:30. Just feel it. If there is an impact, then let's feel it, so we know. And as far as, you know, the public comment, I wasn't necessarily thinking maybe it needs to go to the end, but if we could set it at a spot where it kind of, like I said, in practice was more consistent at a certain time, where people could say, you know what, it's on the regular agenda. It's usually around 6:30, or, you know, it's hard to, you know, forecast that pace of the meetings, but that was just my point, to try to make it consistent. And maybe we don't know what that is until we go through it for a few months and adjust from there.
If I may, I think what may make sense is if we try this, we suspend parts of policy in 185, we do a 6 o'clock start, we leave the meeting opening the way it is, and that way people can expect around 6:10 or 6:15, we're going to be going into public comment.
And if I may, I agree with everything you just said, Board Member Levy. I wonder if we can just bump public comment after the committee and other board reports, if that would give some additional wiggle room, but I don't feel strongly one way or the other. I'm fine with whatever.
Okay, well, that does bring me to a question, and that is the committee's chairs work with the admin to set their agenda. Now, this won't affect policy because you're going to continue being a standalone committee, but the Teaching, Learning, and Equity Committee and the Business Operations Committee, how is this going to work setting those agenda?
So typically, as from a setting of agenda, naturally, committee members, committee chairs have the right to always give us a call and say, hey, what about X and Y? And it's just like any other board member when they send us questions around any agenda item that we may have. And so I don't think that that would change much. My team is very much prepared to, set an agenda based off of what we need. And in this case, working with you, Board President Johnson, we will just have these questions. We will just have these conversations, and because we have to meet a lot more than everybody else. But we'll just have these questions taken care of right from the start whenever we have to present these agendas as needed. There's some specific cadence that every board follows. Like every month, we have to talk about, in essence, our open financials. Every month, we have to probably look at some of the annual board policies that come up on an annual basis. And it's no different in the teaching and learning equity conversations. And as a matter of fact, that team, they set the schedule for the entire year of things and items that we would like to kind of discuss and make changes along the way if we need to. So it's a calendar that we look at and really try to plug in things that we already know we have to have. And as a superintendent, I look at previous year's board meetings all the time to look at what we were doing, how we were, what was coming up at that specific time. Is there an annual specific item that needs to be discussed? And so I don't think that the setting of the agendas would be much of an issue at all, to be fully transparent.
Ms. Levy?
Thank you. I'm going to push back on that a little bit, Dr. Garrison, because if we are now changing our structure to become a committee of the whole, then the board president is the chair of that committee, just like the board president runs the HR committee. So absent policy, if we're meeting as a committee of the whole, the board president chairs it and works with you to set the agenda. But if something was pushed back to committee, then that committee chair would act as the chair of that committee that would meet on the next meeting date at 4:00.
But I also expect board, and again, Mrs. Levy, thank you for sharing that. I also expect board members to have conversations, to say, hey, you know what, I really want to talk about X, and that comes back to Mrs. Johnson. And we work through that agenda setting opportunity.
No, absolutely. Board members will always have input, but when it comes to agenda setting, that's the chair. And if it's a committee of the whole, the chair is the board president.
That's correct.
Would anyone like to make a motion on this?
Point of order. If the motion is going to be to waive policies, I know Board Member Levy had suggested it's just 185, but if you're going to change the start time of the regular board meeting, you also have to waive 171 because that has a 7 o'clock start time in it. I just wanted to make note of that.
Before someone makes a motion, I think we've got 2 times floating around out there, suggested 5:30 and 6. So I think before we, if we can get a consensus on, if we're going to try this, at least let's start with the motion with the best chance of passing.
Okay, thank you.
Also, the ending or so-called ending period of trial was talked about in 3 months and then 6 months. So I think I'm all in favor. My personal opinion would be the 3 months, and then we could work out the bugs and then revisit it. Then 6 months, it may be problematic that we would have to go visit it again anyways. But just as far as the motion, though, I think the 3 month or 6 months should be stipulated in. Thank you.
I agree. I like the idea of reviewing and reflecting after 3 months.
Okay, would anyone like to make a motion on this?
Well, I think we need to get consensus on the start time if we're at 5:30 or 6.
Oh, did you?
I mean, I'm going to be annoying and say I'm fine either way, because I really think like if we started at 5:30 and we just push the public comment after reports, like I think it's going to be kind of just basically the same thing. So you can put me down as I'm going to go with the consensus of the group.
Okay. Tom Hankins?
I'm in favor of the 5:30 start.
Brian Anderson?
5:30 as well.
Brian Nichols?
I'm going to recommend 6:30. That's an hour earlier. That, again, let us not forget the citizens of this city elected us to these positions, and they need to have the right to come and speak as often as they want. And I don't think it's in our best interest to hinder that policy and that procedure, that they can come and talk and speak their piece, and we listen. And I don't ever want to hinder that. So I think if we start at 6:30, I would submit that most everybody's going to be home from work, had dinner, and can come at 6:45, 7 o'clock, and speak.
Thank you. Amy Levy?
6 p.m.
If I could throw one more thing out there with what Brian Nichols said, would it be pretty easily within the board president's purview if we knew there was a topic that we were going to have significant public comment to adjust the agenda accordingly to make sure that it was in a spot that would garner the most input?
I think all the options that the board is talking about right now, we can do. Public comment, I know we definitely want, no one is, stopping public comment. I've always wanted public comment. They have a lot of time to produce public comment, as well as send their public comment in as an option. That's happened before. We have multiple times when people send their comments in. Or they can also just reach out to us from a public comment opportunity. But again, I'm open to allowing, the will of the board to, produce its start time. I just want to make sure everyone knows that I'm open to, however the public comment needs to work itself out.
Ms. Levy?
Thank you. Brian, to answer your question, what we have done in the recent past is if we know something is going to garner, or we believe it'll garner a lot of public comment, that we set aside time on a different day, like a Sunday afternoon or whatever the day and time is. And we usually allow for 2 to 3 hours for public comment on that topic. And people can come in, they can call in, they can write in. And that way we're able to hear it without it flooding the meeting, so to speak.
Just to piggyback off that, it's also because sometimes these things get very emotionally fueled. And like I think Dr. Garrison mentioned earlier, we want to make clear-headed decisions and have time to meaningfully reflect, right? And parse through, right? So, yeah.
Ms. Levy, you bring up a good point, and thank you for bringing it up. In the past, the board had done that. I think that's a practice that we could bring back. We don't have to do it on a Sunday, though. But maybe we can do it on a Wednesday at 6 o'clock, a Wednesday at 6:30, or a Tuesday, opposite Tuesday at 6:30, if it's something that will garner more, that we believe will garner more public comment opportunities. And so thank you for bringing that point up.
Okay. Now it sounds like we're going to add meetings instead of streamline meetings.
But that's based off of what the committee is talking about. The whole board.
That's why I'm making that comment. If we go to a meeting on a Saturday or a Sunday or a Friday night or a Thursday night, or we're gonna be adding meetings, and I'm with everybody else here that let's streamline things and be more efficient. And I think we can do that, but now we're starting to go into the weeds with more meetings, and so we had 5 meetings in March, so just an example. We do what we do. We're all dedicated to doing it, and I appreciate that. I just think call me old-fashioned, because I'm almost the oldest person in this line. Greg's not here, so I am. Anyway, I want to do the right thing for everybody. So.
Thank you, Vice President Nichols. So for time, it looks like we've got 3 for 5:30 with some flexibility in there, 1 at 6:30, 1 at 6. And I personally would prefer a 6 not to make things difficult for everyone.
I can swing to 6.
So, but then that, okay. 6,
If Mrs.
Miller?
Miller moves to her consensus to 6, then it'll be 6. Is that what y'all hear? Okay.
Okay.
No, I'm ready to call the question, but I don't want to cut off discussion if your mic's on, if you want to.
I was just wondering, I know Cadence has been on the agenda for a few times. Did anybody here on this panel or Dr. Garrison get pushback from the public about that?
No conversations were given to me about starting, because we start late
Yes.
in general.
I do believe it's important to have, if we did have input, to consider that, but taking what Brian Nichols said, so.
Okay, so we have Amy Levy has called the question. Would somebody like to make a motion on this item?
I move that we suspend the date and time portions for meetings in policy 171 and 185 in order to, Michelle, I want to make your life easier. We can do 2 separate. If we can just suspend that, and then we'll do a separate motion.
I'll second.
A motion to suspend policy 171 and 185 motion by Amy Levy, seconded by Megan Miller. All in favor, say aye.
Can we have a moment of discussion before we?
I'm
vote?
sorry.
Yeah. The only thing, we had talked about a time frame, and did we want to make that, is that the second motion you're talking about?
Yes.
Thank you.
So
Okay.
right now, I just went, and just to be clear, not the entire policy, but just the portions of policy 171 and 185 that list date and time for meetings.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And then can I get a motion for the meeting cadence?
I move that we follow Dr. Garrison's proposed meeting cadence change, starting meetings on the first and third Tuesday of the month at 6 p.m., and revisiting this topic at our Tuesday, August 20th meeting, regular board meeting.
I'll second.
Motion made by Amy Levy, seconded by Megan Miller. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. That brings us to item 5B, restorative practices discussion.
And as Mrs. Beavers gets to the podium, I will kick off this restorative practice conversation first by starting off saying that our district has went through a lot of different changes, and especially, let me just backtrack just a little bit. Thank you, board, for hearing the cadence conversation. We will just pretty much start an hour earlier in that space. And again, that change that you all have agreed to, naturally, we want to make sure that we do everything we possibly can for that to be successful. So from a restorative justice update, one of the things that I want to remind the board is that we do have a strategic plan. And our strategic plan speaks to us using specific practices, and one of those practices is restorative justices. I believe it's found in our whole child, or is it whole child or in engagement?
It's specifically referenced in whole child. However, there's multiple pillars that align with the work that's done.
So in our strategic plan, it's specifically referenced in our whole child pillar, which I do believe is very important for us just to start off with. Mrs. Beavers is going to take us through this presentation. I know the board has had time to, of course, review it. There has been some questions around the contract that we use with New Root, who is our professional learning provider. The goal, though, again, is to have a conversation around restorative justices. one of the hardest things for me to do, and I'm just going to be honest with you all, is to hear comments that actually hurt our district more than help our district. I've heard a lot of things about our discipline in our school district, and as a district administrator, I have the right to discuss this openly with everyone in the community. We are not the same school district that many people may believe we used to be. I don't know who all the people are, okay? But I can say that we have made some tremendous changes in our school district to better the atmosphere and the environments for all of our students. Now, do we have things that we have to work on? Yes. The answer is yes. Are there still opportunities for us to, get better in our classroom environments? Yes. But you would be hard pressed to ask any school district that same question and get a no. Period. From the historically marginalized conversations to the gifted and talented conversations, you'd be hard-pressed to find any school district that'll say, no, we don't have any problems in our classrooms, and the discipline is all perfect. And so I want to make sure that I tell the public that we are not the same organization that many people may have thought about us. I invite people to come to our schools, walk in those classrooms, walk in the buildings with us. We've offered that opportunity to many right here on the board as well, to come into our buildings naturally and see what we have, to help us dispel this idea that we are out of control every day and things are going crazy in our classrooms. I think it's due time for us to change that narrative, because in the past, when we were having multiple infractions and multiple suspensions, it was the school district is going crazy and it's out of control. And now when we start making changes, it's, well, now something, we must be hiding something, or something is not being recorded. And this is a weird conversation for a district administrator, because it's like, okay, well, we want our infractions to go down, right? That's kind of what any school district would want, and that includes the school district of Beloit. And so I take this time to preface this conversation because I don't want anyone to think for a second that we don't have things that we want to change, but I also don't want people to think for a second that the changes that we have made haven't benefited our students. I don't want anyone to think that the changes that we have made has benefited our students. And it's very important to note that. Our kids hear what you're saying about them, they listen to the narratives, and it's high time for us to change that narrative as a community, not just as a school district, as a community. Because what the community say about us, people listen. What we say about us, sometimes people listen. And so I hope that this, opening part of this conversation at least allows everyone to have open ears about restorative justice. Again, it is something that's in our strategic plan. And I did want to take this time to just share that as an opening before I turn it over to Mrs. Beavers for further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Garrison, and thank you to the board for requesting that I be here tonight to provide some additional information regarding the work that the district has done for the past 2 years around restorative justice. Like Dr. Garrison said, my name's Melissa Beavers. I'm the Executive Director of Pupil Services. I did see Eric Weir pop online. So Eric, feel free to jump in if I'm missing anything or you have anything to add. He's the Director of Special Education and Student Services who has helped champion the work with me. I think it's important to note before we get started, thank you, Dr. Garrison, for that intro. That was great. Just a brief history of how we got to this place. Restorative justice was identified as a strategy in a continuous improvement plan that was submitted to DPI and approved to address a federal identification of being disproportionate in the area of discipline. The School District of Beloit committed to the use of restorative practices, like Dr. Garrison said, in our strategic plan. We also have it mentioned in the Code of Conduct, and it's been there for years. Because of this, in our federal identification, we went out to bid. on an organization to help facilitate that work. And through that process, the district chose New Route. We just got our new federal identifications out. We are no longer disproportionate in the area of discipline, but we are discrepant. So we're moving in the right direction. Like Dr. Garrison said, there's still work to be done. So it's really important to note that restorative justice is the philosophy or the mindset. Restorative practices are the actions or what we do. And New Route is our resource, or the organization that we use to provide the professional learning. So please keep that in mind as we go through the presentation. Oh, gosh. My computer's not going to move forward,
I got you.
but I'm presenting. There we go.
All right.
Okay, so just starting with what is restorative justice, and like I said, it's a mindset, and it's a mindset that values relationships at the center of community. When we're focused on relationships, we are invested in creating and maintaining a strong community by building relationships proactively and repairing relationships when harm occurs. It's about building a community where everyone feels heard, valued, and supported in their efforts to make amends and move forward positively. Restorative justice can be proactive or it can be reactive. Proactive practices are preventative and they reduce harm. We build a foundation of relationships and focused on community. These would be your community building circles. This is a universal level strategy. When reactive practices are put into place, these repair harm, not reduce harm, they repair harm. This would be when an incident has taken place and harm has been done. They would be your peace circles. This is a tier 3 type intervention. So we've got proactive practices again and reactive practices. So preventing harm, repairing harm. So this is just like an MLSS system, just like in the academic world, we do universal intervention, targeted intervention, and intensive intervention. And at no place does restorative justice or restorative practices take the place of the accountability of the student. So, like I said, we're in just finishing year 2 of a 3-year partnership of really doing the work. So step 1 was laying the foundation, and this took us about a year and a half. So I'm just going to talk about what we've kind of been doing. We had to lay the foundation. We completed a needs assessment at the district level to gather information and create a plan. While we learned about all types of restorative practices, we did choose to lean in on the universal level to focus on mindsets and community and relationship building. We identified and provided professional development to a district level implementation team, as well as now to 10 building level teams. So we have a district level team and 10 building level teams. We expanded the professional learning to our support staff, our in-school support staff. We also provided optional choice sessions to staff who were interested in learning more. We have incorporated restorative practices into the social and emotional learning lessons that we have going on in buildings, and we have begun providing intentional coaching at the building levels. Excuse me. Okay, the next step then was getting into implementation. As we moved from the foundational work to implementation, we started again with a needs assessment. This time the needs assessment was done at each building level. So first we did district, now we're at the building level. We had each building complete this self-assessment, focusing on areas such as systems and structures, mindsets and language, student voice, engagement, etc. This information was then used for action planning. The building teams created school-wide restorative practices implementation plans with action steps aligned to them. Currently, the building teams are meeting with our partners, New Route, to determine what support they need to move forward with their building plans. This would include continued coaching to work towards a sustainable system in year 3. So what's next? Year 3, sustainability. So again, we chose to focus on building community in an effort to promote positive school culture. Buildings will have continued exposure to restorative justice coaching. They will be provided with additional training and practice with staff and students, and there is a definite desire by buildings to involve their families and the greater community in year 3 of the work. While this is year 2 of the work, year 1 was really laying the foundation, so the district really is in year 1 of an implementation plan. So please note that change takes time. We anticipate to see significant shifts in years 3 to 5. That's implementation science. Adopting a restorative mindset does not mean that we eliminate the code of conduct or that students will not receive consequences for their actions. And again, the district has committed to implementing restorative practices that aligns with the strategic plan and the work we are doing in the priority areas of equity, culture and leadership, whole child, and engagement. What shifts are we looking for? What can we expect to see? So I'm just going to read this word for word. We can hopefully see a shift in school culture, which I'll get to. An increase in teacher confidence and efficacy with the use of restorative practices. An increase in sense of belonging for both students and adults. A decrease of out-of-school suspensions. A decrease of student-level infractions. And an increase in parent engagement. So we're going to go to a little bit of data, and I just want you to consider that we're in the infancy stages of implementation here. So this data is not being presented as a measure of impact, but rather as data points that we look at and that we will continue to look at as we move through the implementation process. It's kind of a baseline, if you will. While there is a definite correlation between the data and the restorative justice work we are engaging in, one could point out that there are other contributing factors to the data as well. So the data you're currently looking at here has been taken from our district social emotional screener. This year was the first year that we used this screener. Fall was a pilot window. Buildings were given a choice of grade levels to pilot, and then there was a full implementation during the winter testing window. Students had 3 options to choose from when presented with the statements: I agree a little, I agree a lot, and I disagree. And you can see the statements there. I feel safe, rules are fair, teachers care about me, kids care about me, teachers help me learn, teachers encourage me. And again, our focus is building community and relationships. This is grades K through 3. It's a web-based assessment that is read aloud to students. This is the same questions for grades 4 through 5. This data then is collected. It guides the adult actions. We can be responsive to this. So again, while there might be correlation between the data and restorative justice work we are engaging in, the district has other initiatives that certainly impact the data as well. But this is being shared as data points that we will continue to monitor as we work through the work. This next slide, you're looking at staff culture that was gathered from a climate survey given in the fall of this year. These statements, again, focus on relationships, belonging, and trust. I don't have to read them to you, but this is on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being disagree, 5 being agree, and then this is an average of what was reported. Again, data that we should begin to see a shift in as we continue the restorative work. Just another data point to look at. Lastly, I've presented some information on attendance and discipline. Again, a correlation between the work and the data, but restorative practice is only one factor in many that has an impact on this data. I've got attendance rates here over the last 3 years. Disciplinary incidents, this would be any disciplinary removal from the classroom, whether that be in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension, and then our pre-expulsion and expulsion hearings to date. So lastly, I certainly wanted to bring everybody's attention to the funding because this is getting a lot of attention. In regards to the partnership with New Route, we are finishing up year 2 of a 3-year partnership. And I wanted to discuss the price tag attached to that. You can see the 3-year breakdown of cost here. Please note that Fund 10 was never a source of funding, but rather braided grant and ESSER funds have been and will continue to be used to cover the cost. Year 1 was completed at a total cost of $164,000, and this was our district level work building the foundation. Years 2 and 3 were approved by the Board of Education not to exceed $609,000 what? Yeah, $600,000. However, you can see that we are already coming in under that. We anticipate that this year will come in under the $367,000, and we also anticipate year 3 will come in under budget as well, as we are responsive to what our buildings need. The total amount paid to date from July of 2022 to current is $850,000. That's all the information I have to provide to you tonight, so I'm happy to take questions or comments.
Do any board members have any questions or comments? Go ahead, Ms. Levy.
Just a couple, thank you. First of all, thank you for the presentation, and thank you for highlighting that this does not remove accountability, that it includes professional learning, and that it is aligned to our strategic plan, which was not just built in-house, but that was a community-wide process. So I really appreciate you laying that out. My first question is, could you explain what it means to be identified as DPI as a disproportionate district?
I'll do the best I can without notes on that in front of me. It means that we disproportionately discipline specifically Black students, and then we have a little bit more on that, students with IEPs as well. So we are disciplining them at a rate higher than other races in our district.
Thank you, and I would take to that higher to their population in our buildings. Is
Yes.
that accurate? Thank you so much. And do you believe that our proactive and reactive restorative justice processes, as you've described them, have assisted in our positive movement away from our identification by DPI as a disproportionate district?
Yes, I definitely think they assist. With the work of restorative justice, we're also doing a lot of work around calibrating, around office discipline referrals, what we can do differently. And so I wouldn't say that's 100% the reason, but I would definitely say that it has impact.
No, that's definitely fair. So I take that to mean that when we're looking at our historically marginalized communities that our districts serve, that activities and programming like restorative practices has been a benefit to our entire district, and specifically those students that were previous to this over-identified for discipline. Is that accurate?
I would agree with you.
Perfect. And then my final question, what are the restrictions on funds used to support our current restorative practice work? And what I mean by that is the pots of money that cover this work can't be used for any and everything. There are restrictions on that funding. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Go ahead, Brian Anderson.
So, one of the things in the slides is says, it doesn't replace the code of conduct. And could you just, help me understand how the code of conduct remains in force? Because
absolutely.
the proactive piece of it, I think that's encouraging, right? When you say there's proactive and reactive, and the proactive, we could do a lot more things proactively.
Sure.
But the code of conduct by nature is reactive.
Yeah.
So, explain how the code of conduct is not impacted
Yep.
by the practice.
Yep. So it's easiest for me to kind of give you an example, if that works. So the reason why we decided to really focus on universal is because the hope is that the more you build community, the less incidents you will have, right? Because I'm going to take care of you and you're going to hold me accountable, and all my peers are going to do the same. And so I'm just going to use the example of a fight. Let's say a fight happens in the school, student receives a consequence, is out of school suspended. When that student comes back to school, perhaps a restorative circle is going to take place with the student and the victim, and they're going to repair the harm in that circle. So you still get the consequence, but you come back and you have the restorative circle. Does that help?
No, it does. I just, the concerns that are brought to me are if we're trying to, fix disparate outcomes beforehand proactively, I think that's fantastic. But once the code of conduct has been breached, it's what happens after that, right? But as far as, because the other thing it mentions in the presentation is the idea is not to just solely focus on the punishment, but the very nature of the code of conduct says you do this, this is what happens. And are you saying that even through this restorative justice practice, if this code of conduct is breached, this still happens?
Yes, if somebody violates the code of conduct,
Yeah.
we hold them accountable for that, yes.
Okay. All right. And a couple other things. I know we're not looking at having, massive amounts of impact and results yet, but it's just, we've got on some of the slides there, you've got, kind of this fall and winter one. And it's pretty much for both the third, K through 3 and the 4 through 5 are mixed results, which makes sense. It's a short time frame.
First time we gave it.
First time you gave it, right? So I get that. Well, I'm curious, when you did the culture data for the staff survey, we don't have 2 separate metrics for that. Has the staff been given that twice so that we see if there's movement in the staff culture?
Not by this organization. So it wouldn't be, we have previous staff climate data. This is the first time we've used school perceptions, so the questions wouldn't align yet.
Okay.
So we'll have that hopefully in fall.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Any other board questions or comments?
I have a question. The example that you gave where somebody fought and sent them home for how long? How long do they go home for?
That's up to the principal.
Okay. So then what happens if it happens again in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks? What happens?
There's a violation of the code of conduct, and the principal would hold them accountable.
Okay. And then what?
It depends.
I'm just
Sure.
trying to see.
Yeah, good question. I
I'm
think
just trying to see where responsibility, ultimately responsibility comes into play in the process.
If I may jump in, under policy where the code of conduct is housed, it is progressive. So if this is a first offense, a second offense, a third offense, and it depends on the type of offense that it is.
And I think
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Ms. Levy took the words right out of my mouth. So if it's a progressive thing, we end up having different conversations with that student, which could lead up to anything from an administrative hearing to after the administrative hearing. If it's consistent and multiple opportunities, now we're talking about possible even expulsion conversations. And so, Mrs. Levy, thank you for sharing that.
The only piece I was going to add is, when you think about educating the whole child, we provide learning opportunities for children, both academically and social emotional learning. And so when a child, and the many of you on the panel, I'm assuming are parents, when a child does something, you can punish them, right? You can send them to their room, but it's the conversations and the relationships and the learning that happens that curbs the behavior. And so in a code of conduct, if a student is sent home and suspended, suspension doesn't change behavior, right? It's about what's happening afterwards, how you're repairing harm in a community of children that go to school together. And so that's the idea. One does not replace the other. It is how we educate our children, how they are members of a community and a school community, and how they treat one another. That's the goal here. And so the message is lost when we try to change a narrative that this replaces high expectations around behavior. In fact, this increases expectations around behavior. Because when you're in a community of people that care about one another, your expectations for how you treat one another excel, right? They change. And so we can't twist the two or say one is without the other. And I think that's what we have to really come to understand that we're trying to do here. And when I was involved in the conversations with the strategic plan, this came out a lot. And that I think Ms. Levy pointed that out earlier. That was not done in silos. That was done in community conversations over several weeks. And the community was saying, how are we doing a better job educating our children about having a sense of belonging? And so that's just what I wanted to add, because I've watched this conversation evolve over time. And unfortunately, I think a message was lost in truly understanding the good work here, because it's not just about the whole child. There's an equity layer here, which is another priority area that was adopted by the board.
These two. Thank you.
Yep.
Board President Johnson, do you mind if I jump in?
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I guess, so I'm a teacher also, like in my day job, and I just wanted to speak to, just to some of the concerns that were raised. And I just want to say that I have 3 kids in the district, and I am super appreciative that we're raising these concerns, because there's like nothing more important than student safety, and I appreciate the focus on that. I also want to say I send my 3 kids here to school very confidently in their safety, and my own experience as a teacher, I was trained in restorative practices, I believe it was in 2013, when I was on our PBIS committee at Beloit Memorial High School. And I kept my resources, and I brought some along with this evening, and I just wanted to share like a real life day-to-day experience that I just had yesterday with a child. And because, I don't want to divulge information, but one of my 6th graders was having a tricky time yesterday, and I absolutely would have been justified saying, hey, bud, see you later, go, But, what restorative practices means on a classroom level, it's not always like a circle. It can just be like humanizing that child's experience and saying, you know what, I'm going to walk away from this for 5 minutes. You're going to dial down and make better choices. We came back to it, and that child chose to stay after class, talk to me about it, ended up repairing the harm that the child caused with another child, and came today with we had a great day today. Like good learning occurred, and that's good learning that would have been lost, right, with exclusionary discipline. I also just want to help clarify, because it's a weird concept, like if you're not a classroom teacher, so I don't want to diminish anybody's perspectives at all. So I want to, just in the spirit of sharing and building understanding, I just brought my book that I got a couple, like almost 10 years ago now. There's like a little spectrum, and it's like high control, low support, high support. And the restorative practices little cube quadrant here is like high control, high support. And so just like the very brief highlighted passage that I wanted to share with you is when we do things with children, right? Let's see, the more they're engaged. So if we hand out punishments, we're doing things to them. When we take care of their problems for them and make no demands, then we're just doing things for them. When we ignore their behavior, we're not doing anything. And so just what are we restoring? We're restoring those who have been harmed by the wrong. We're restoring relationships. We're restoring a sense of well-being and a feeling of community. And more importantly, we're putting ownership on the child to learn, to grow into a more responsible, compassionate human being, which is what I want for all of our kids in our community. So that's just my 85 cents as a teacher. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Was that do you have a comment, Tom? My experience has been, since I've been on the board and reaching out to teachers, current educators in the school district of Beloit, past educators, and community members, administrators, building administrators, there seems to be a conflating of New Route, the program, and restorative justice, restorative practices. Everyone seems to be in favor of restorative practices. That's not the issue. We want restorative practices when it's right and appropriate. The pushback is we have educators, classroom educators, regardless of what your data says, that are upset about New Route. They don't feel supported. They feel it's a waste of their time, and they feel angry that the district has spent so much money on this program when there were other programs that possibly could have been just as effective, if not more effective, and cost less money. people look at this and they see not to exceed $720,000, and they start calculating how many classroom educators is that? How many fewer students could I have in my classroom had we spent this money on educators rather than this program, this new route program? I know that there's grant money for the program. That I don't know the details of that grant. I don't know what else that money could have been used for, but I know that our classroom educators are upset. I have not heard one teacher say New Route is a good thing. New Route has significantly improved my classroom. Teachers are stressed and they don't feel like they can report behaviors, negative behaviors, and feel it's actually having a negative impact on academics. I've gotten emails from, that's quite a rain, isn't it? Emails from community members, teachers, and there was one positive comment from a community member regarding restorative practices, but not New Route. I think we need to really consider, especially the fact that we have had a failed referendum, actually 3 failed referendum in the last 2 years, and we need to make budget cuts.
I'm not sure if it's a statement more so than it is a thought that I would like the board to consider. Restorative justice is not the reason why we did not pass our referendum. New Route is not the reason why we did not, pass our referendum. And again, I'm not sure if that's a statement or just a thought, or both. My hopes is that, again, and my original statements, that we are disproportionately recognized in the state of Wisconsin as being a district that has suspended Black and brown students at a disproportionate rate above their peers. So if teachers are sharing specific opportunities in which we can be better, I would ask them to reach out to their principals, reach out to the district administration, and have additional conversations around what we can do differently to support them in their classroom. We have not changed anything since I've been here besides holding everyone to the same accountability that y'all hold me to, which is you got to come into this building, you got to do your job every day. And that's hard work. Being a teacher is hard work. Being in administration is hard work, and I truly understand that. But if there are people who are reaching out to you all, I would also ask you to direct them back to us so that we can have additional conversations with them as it pertains to what could we do differently to support them better in their classroom to get whatever they need to be successful in educating the kids that's in front of them. Again, we are disproportionately rated. And there's no superintendent in the state of Wisconsin that's going to be like, yay to that. And that's okay. And so the efforts that we're trying to make is helping us change that narrative in our school district. And I think that's what, well, I don't think, that is what we should be doing. That is what we should be doing. If you go back and look at our data, I understand that, again, and teachers have the right to share how they feel about New Route or our professional learning agency, okay? But again, if you look back at our data, 94 pre-expulsion hearings, 12 expulsion hearings in 2021, 22, and before then, the numbers probably was similar to that. These are real people. These are real kids that live in our community, come to our schools, that were coming to our schools on a daily basis, depending on what year they were in school, of course. Of course, we've had some changes in that time frame since then, but that doesn't mean that we're not trying to, make sure that we hold true to working with all of our students. And I say this, and I've made this statement before in many of my spaces and around equity. Kids may get in trouble, right? They may get in trouble, and they get in trouble. But sometimes you get in trouble and you fall out of trouble too. right? Like, I know all of us on this board may have gotten in trouble before, but there was sometimes when we got in trouble, we were so glad that we didn't get in trouble. We kind of fell out of trouble. And so we're working with students and their behaviors. We're working with teachers, working with parents. We're working with our community. And we're all in this learning around how can we better serve students. And that's what I think this is truly about. Like, how can we better serve our students? And teachers are a major part of that. And again, if these are conversations that are happening, unbeknownst of anyone in administration, I would ask that when these conversations are happening, that we get these conversations back to administration so we can work with the teachers. Again, work with the teachers to figure out what can we do differently to support you in the classroom, because it is not okay for us to think that we don't want to help teachers in the classroom when they're having tough problems with students' behaviors. And so I just want to make sure I note that in the conversation. Again, that's just kind of where
Thank
I
you,
am.
Dr. Garrison. Yes, I 100% agree. There is not a superintendent or principal out there that does not want to see their behavior rates decrease. If we could get it down to zero, everybody would say, let's get it down to zero. Also, there aren't teachers that are out there saying, oh, I want to. There probably aren't many teachers out there saying, hey, I want to punish this student just for no reason, and I'm going to punish that student. Does that happen? Yes. Like when a doctor prescribes a medication, he or she has to consider the risks versus the benefits. I am concerned here as a board member, as I have been for the past several years now, what our teachers are experiencing in the classroom and the lack of support. We do want our infractions to go down. We want them to go down for the correct reason, and that being improved behaviors. We want these behaviors to improve at home. We want the students to get rest. We want the parents to be involved. And we want the teachers to know if somebody is acting out that they have a way to address that issue and that it's not going to be ignored. Right now, I have been getting feedback from the educators for the past several months. The New Route program is ineffective and costing us too much money. What other programs exist to address the continuous improvement plan indicated by DPI?
And that's something we have to look into. Right now, again, in our strategic plan, we're talking about restorative justice, and that's what our strategic plan has asked us to bring forward. I don't know what other opportunities that we can actually look at the current time at the top of my head.
I have in front of me the 3 bids.
Okay. You can share those if you like, yeah.
I mean, I don't have the amounts. I pulled them up from 2021 when we presented them. Restorative justice education, Restore More. One is out of, I believe, Fort Collins, Colorado, and the other one, I'm not quite sure. They just offered things that were not fitting for our district like we thought New Route was.
I have a question along those lines. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. It sounds like, and jump in at any point if I get it wrong, it sounds like you believe that restorative justice is good, but we may need to shift from New Route. My concern is we are in year 2 of 3. If we shift to another company, are we starting over with them, with laying the foundation, with another 3-year plan? Because if that is the interest, that's going to cost us way more than what we have committed to paying here with, I'm not sure what the outcomes would be. It seems to me that the prudent thing to do would be to be in touch with New Root and to elevate these concerns that you've been hearing for the past months, if I heard you correctly, and get those addressed with our current dance partner instead of starting over from scratch at an undetermined amount to keep the spirit of the work going.
May I, or Eric, do you want to speak to that, what we've done after we listened to the concerns?
Yeah, good evening, board. We had heard some initial concerns after the first couple professional learning opportunities in year one, and we have gone back to New Root as our partner. We've shared those concerns. They have been on site. They've connected specifically with administrators and with staff to hear their honest thoughts in regards to some aspects of the implementation and professional learning directly so that they could be more responsive. And in fact, the individual kind of building check-ins and connections that have started to roll out have been a direct response of theirs to that feedback that they received from staff and administrators about some of the initial larger group professional learning. I think it's also important, though, to note that the professional learning and the percent of staff that have had interactions with New Root is significantly small because last year we really just had that district team, and that team was the administrators from the buildings and only 2 champions, so 2 staff members, and then district administration as well. And this year, each building has an implementation team, and that team varies in size dependent on the building. And it consists of obviously their building administration and anywhere between 3 to 6, and in like the high school's case, up to 9 staff members. So it has not been, the direct interaction with our New Root partners has not been on a large scale with staff yet. The only exposure that staff outside of those 2 groups would have been if they elected on their own to attend one of the choice professional learning sessions that were offered during our district-wide professional learning days.
Okay, so how many staff members have been trained with New Root?
You have a district level team that's been trained, and you have a building level team. And like Eric said, there's about 10 people on the building level team for each building. And then it's the implementation plans that they're creating right now will be rolled out at the building level by the building administrator and the building team.
I'm sorry, I was just taking some notes.
No, that's good.
Board Member Hankins, please go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to concur with Board President Johnson. On my 3-month campaign trail, New Root seemed to be, and I beg to differ with Dr. Garrison, was a lightning rod of the disconnect between the taxpayers, citizens, and the referendum. I heard it over and over, get rid of New Root. And as it went, it came from the citizenry, but also from the building staff, administration, down into the teachers that I did talk to in the 3 months plus. And so there is something going on that there is so much displeasure with it. And I'm not sure where the disconnect is between building administration and teachers and Missy and Eric with the dissatisfaction, because it is out there. And I'm not saying every teacher and every building administration, but there is a lot of disconnect that is present, and they're not falling in line with it. And if they're not sold on it, they're going to push back against, and it is New Root. It's not restorative justice, whatever. That big, there just seems to be something that New Route rubs people wrong. And even the citizenry was like a complete waste of money. And if whoever brought up the referendum, I do believe that was part of one of the reasons why a citizen would vote against something, that we're spending money on something that we didn't need to, that wasn't working, more than just incrementally.
May I respond? We did need to, because DPI directed us to create a plan, so we did. And I think part of the misconception out there is that it cost $2 million, which it certainly did not, and I showed that to you tonight. So I think there's misinformation out there that we continue to try to fight to shut it down, but it continues even when we give the correct information. It's out there. So the teachers who don't even have interaction with New Route, our partners, are saying, holy cow, the district has paid $2 million for this, and we're not seeing any impact from it. And they're not even interacting with our partners. Because like we said, there's a building team of maybe 10, so maybe 100 staff members throughout the district that have had direct contact with them. So that's just my personal opinion on that.
Is there a line of communication between, I'll just say, Missy and Eric and the building staff on New Route and the dissatisfaction and/or satisfaction with it directly?
So like Eric just mentioned, we sat down with our partners and the staff that they work directly with to have a transparent meeting about, because we were hearing concerns. So we brought them all in the same room in the spirit of restorative to be transparent and have a conversation. And that's when we stopped. We looked at what was outlined in our contract. We renegotiated the contract and created a new plan that was responsive to what the principals wanted.
I don't want to get lost in the weeds on this, but have you met with them without New Route in the same room?
We've spoken with the principal. I mean, yes, we've spoken with them, probably not as formal as we did that day. Eric, I don't know if you want to add to that. I mean, we've had multiple conversations with the principals and with the staff on the teams.
Yeah, we've received email communications from, staff as well, initially, that had outlined some of those concerns that they had. So there's been a direct line, at least from the team that has the direct interaction with our partner, New Route. There's been ample opportunities to have formal conversations, informal conversations, provide thoughts and feedback in writing, verbally.
And I think since they've pivoted and made a change as to how they're delivering the support, I think perhaps, I would like to say, your feedback might be different for the people working directly with the partners.
Yeah, Amy, and then Amy Levy, and then Brian Nichols.
Yeah, if I may ask Board Member Hankins a question. If I'm understanding you correctly, the constituents that you've been in contact with love restorative justice, but just have an issue with New Route that they haven't had contact with. Is that a accurate summation?
Yes.
Okay, that's encouraging. Thank you. And then my other question overall is, this is listed as an action discussion information, so lots of options there. And I want to make sure all voices are heard, but what is the outcome of this conversation? Where are we headed with this?
Brian Nichols.
Well, just a couple of questions. You mentioned that a building has 10 members working on?
Give or take, yes.
Give or take, 10 members. So how much time a day are they spending on this?
It's during the professional learning days that the district has no student contact.
Okay.
If I may, I just think this has been a really helpful discussion, and I'm learning a lot about everybody's views. I think this has been a very productive use of our time. But I just want to kind of note that it's 9:03, and it sounds to me like, and I might be wrong, but what I'm hearing a good way to move forward might be is that it sounds like we should be getting more updates about what that communication is like, and how things are, maybe some staff climate, how are things going. Just like we would look at that data, you shared some great baseline data with us, and I'm wondering if everybody's comfortable moving forward with This is really like 1 year in on the ground. Things take time, and I would be in favor of closing our discussion with an expectation that our administration will continue to show the responsiveness to the concerns that were lifted up.
Any other board members?
No, I absolutely support that.
Okay.
Can I make a
Oh, go ahead, Brian.
I guess the only thing I'm going to say is, throughout my work life, I had a gentleman tell me this one time, and he said, when you get down to the bottom of the ultimate issue, it's lack of communication. So I've lived by that, and I found it to be pretty darn true. So it sounds like there's some disconnects within the organization, and it's all communication. So I would submit that I wasn't here when this whole thing got started, so I can't really address the beginnings and all that sort of thing. But it sounds like there is some disconnect, within the buildings and within the district, and we kind of need to resolve them before we, continue to spend money on something. I'm not faulting what you've presented at all. I'm just saying, I've heard some of this too, maybe not to the degree of Tia and or Board President Johnson and Board Member Hankins, but I've heard some of it, and I haven't known enough about it to really be an educated example, but if we truly have people in the buildings that are unhappy with it, then it's going to be hard to make it successful. But all of you need to figure that out and get better, improve.
And I'll piggyback on Vice President Nichols' comment. As I mentioned earlier, in every decision that we board members make, we have to weigh the immediate results and the long-term results. There are costs involved that go beyond just this dollar amount. If we are losing good teachers because they don't feel supported when it comes to addressing behaviors in the classroom, those are costs that are going to burden us for years to come. If we are losing families because they don't feel safe in the classrooms because the behaviors are not being addressed, those are costs that are going to burden us years to come. And then they have secondary costs of the public's perception of people fleeing the school district of Beloit.
So again, yeah, I think I totally think these are great concerns, and maybe our next update, could we just include some metrics maybe for admin support and closing some of those communication gaps?
I think a reasonable next step is look at our communication opportunity. I did write that down as a possibility of something that we can do better in. I mean, no one is aiming to, not connect with anybody in our public, but it is hard though, because we have data and then someone else has their perceptions, and I look at data. Everyone knows that. I'm looking at the hard data, and so it's hard to fight the perceptions opportunity, but that is something that I have to consider in these conversations with my team. Again, I'm looking at hard data, and the hard data is speaking to us making this change and being necessary for our community. New Root is our partner. That's like Mrs. Levy mentioned and other board members mentioned. That's the partner that we have right now. We've had hard conversations with them around let's make some changes around with the partners that we're working with. They've made some of those changes. I mean, you would think that's what you would want to see. We've made changes in the contract. That's what you would want to see. So from a data perspective, that's what I'm responsible for on running the day-to-day part. And so I do want to make sure that we communicate more effectively around what we're doing. And then that's not to say that we're not doing everything we can, but we can always get better at communicating.
Thank you. Anything else? Any final comments?
Yeah. I just want to reiterate, the communication, Board Member Nichols, everyone's brought up very valid points. I think the new route, from what I hear, and again, I'm not an educator, I'm not in the school buildings, but it seems to be the disconnect is between administration, teachers, and the implementation of new route. That, I mean, it's fine and dandy for us to say we'll do a better job of communicating, but I think we need to take the input from the teachers, administration, people in the building, and pass that on and upward to new route. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hankins. Okay, that will bring us to item 6, the consent agenda. Typically, there is no separate discussion of the items unless a board member so requests, in which event the item will be removed from the general order of business and considered in their normal sequence on the agenda. Does any board member like any of the consent agenda items removed?
Yes, item 6C, 440.1, students of legal age.
Okay, Brian Nichols has requested item 6C be removed. Anybody else? Okay, can I get?
Point of order. I don't believe item A came out of committee, unless I misunderstood the committee meeting.
It did not, so you're correct. It did not come out of committee, and it's something we have to bring back, so that will need to be omitted. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Ms. Schultz.
I move approval of the consent agenda minus items A and C.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Amy Levy has moved the approval of the consent agenda minus items A and C. This was seconded by Megan Miller. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Brian Anderson, item A, are you guys
Oh, on item A, I'm sorry.
yeah. The update on the depositories, is that going back to committee?
Yes.
It is.
Okay.
It is, yes.
Okay. Is there any further discussion that anyone has on item A right now? Okay. Item C, Brian Nichols.
Yes, I'd like to adjust item 1 on paragraph 3, sign absence, excuses, and permission slips theirself. I make a motion that we change the wording on that. Policy 440.1, paragraph 3, item 1 to read sign absence, excuses, and permission slips theirself.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion by Brian Nichols, seconded by Brian Anderson. All in favor?
Point of order, we need to open the floor for discussion.
I'm sorry, thank you. Any discussion or questions?
I just want to remind the board that the last time gender erasure came up from policy, we had a conversation that it would be prudent to touch base with our communities, specifically those most greatly impacted by policies, students and staff of our district. And I think in honoring the work of being inclusive, and connect it to our community, that before we make shifts in policy to erase gender, that I think it would make sense to check in with students and staff and community members to see what their will is.
Thank you. Any other comments? Questions?
I agree.
Megan Miller? Okay. We have a motion on the floor by Brian Nichols, seconded by Brian Anderson.
And I'd like a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Michelle? Ms. Shope?
Megan Miller,
Nay?
Brian Anderson,
Aye.
Tom Hankins,
Aye.
Brian Nichols,
Aye.
Amy Levy,
Nay.
Tia Johnson.
Aye.
Also, Greg has joined the meeting.
I'm sorry, you said aye? Okay, so the motion carried 4-2.
Greg has joined the meeting. If we could allow him that
I'm so
opportunity
sorry.
to vote.
Greg Schneider?
Nay. Nay.
So the motion carried 4-3.
Thank you. Item 7, future meeting dates, and because we are going to probably be going into closed session here in just a moment, I am going to take a point of presidential privilege and wish all of the board members and all of the community members and everyone who has a mother, happy Mother's Day this Sunday. Our future board meeting dates, Dr. Garrison.
So as it stands, our future board meeting dates will still be on the third Tuesday of this month. It'll be May the 21st. We will have some changes based off of the cadence conversation that was approved tonight. And so me and Board President Johnson have some things to work through. This is not a, well, thank you.
Okay, that brings us to item 8, executive session. Typically, the board meets in closed session per state statutes listed below to discuss items in this section of the agenda. The public is excused from this portion of the discussion. A motion may be made and a vote taken to convene the Board of Education into closed session pursuant to Section 19.85, Parent 1, Parent C, and Section 19.85, Parent 1, Parent E, in regards to compensation and negotiations with the BEA.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Megan Miller, seconded by Amy Levy. Roll call, please.
Greg Schneider,
Oh, I'm so sorry. Could we actually have discussion? Are we convening from closed session? We just may want to announce that. So adjourning, thank you. So the expectation isn't that people expect us to come back out and open.
So yeah, we'll be adjourning in closed session.
Okay, any other discussion?
ready? Greg Schneider,
Aye.
Amy Levy,
Aye.
Megan Miller,
Aye.
Brian Anderson,
Aye.
Brian Nichols,
Aye.
Tom Hankins,
Aye.
and Tia Johnson.
Aye.
Motion carried unanimously.